Chapter 1: The Iron Gate. The groan of tortured metal was the only sound in the alley. Ben threw his weight against the rusted maintenance grate, his boots slipping on the slick, moss-covered cobblestones. A sharp, metallic pop echoed between the brick walls, and the grate swung inward with a final screech, revealing a square of perfect blackness. A gust of stale, cold air, heavy with the scent of ancient dust and decay, washed over him. It smelled like a buried secret. "Pass me the crowbar," Maya's voice cut through the London night. Her headlamp beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the anxiety etched on Ben's face. "You're making a racket." "It's a 300-pound piece of cast iron, Maya. It isn't going to open with a whisper." Ben wiped a grimy hand on his cargo pants and reached for the tool. He wedged the crowbar's tip into the hinge. "I still think this is a mistake. Aldwych is sealed for a reason. Proper sealed. Not just keep out the kids sealed." "Every ghost station is sealed," she countered, her voice buzzing with an impatience he recognized. She adjusted the camera mounted beside her headlamp, its small red light blinking with a steady, judgmental pulse. "That's the point. This is the Holy Grail. The one they welded shut and wiped off the maps. Think of the hits. Think of the subscribers." "I'm thinking of the structural reports from the 80s, asbestos, black mold, subsidence." Ben gave a grunt and put his shoulder into the crowbar. The hinge snapped with a sound like a breaking bone. The grate was open, not to mention the stories. "Stories are what we're here for," Maya said, her grin a flash of white in the gloom. She unslung her pack, a high-tech monstrosity of nylon and looped cables. "Besides, the stories are rubbish. Bubonic plague in the 60s, a government cover-up. It's classic urban legend bait. They probably just found a crack in the foundation and decided it was cheaper to bury it." She swung her legs into the opening and her light disappeared. Her voice floated up, already distorted by the subterranean space. "You coming, or are you going to let the rats get you?" Ben took one last breath of the damp city air and followed her down the iron rungs of the ladder. The world above vanished. The oppressive weight of the city pressed in. The air grew colder, thicker. Each rung seemed to take him further from the living world. His boots hit the concrete floor of the spiral staircase, landing with a puff of dust that danced like powdered bone in his headlamp beam. The silence was absolute, a physical presence that pushed against his eardrums. They descended for what seemed an eternity, their lights carving a small, moving bubble of reality out of the immense darkness. The walls shifted from rough-hewn brick to the iconic, curving tiles of the underground, coated in a century of grime. Faded posters clung to the walls like dead skin. A vintage advertisement for Bovril, its cheerful red lettering obscured by streaks of black mold. A public information poster, its words mostly illegible, but a stark, simple drawing of a person bent over in agony was still visible. "Here we are," Maya whispered, her voice a reverent hiss. "The platform level." Her beam swept across the scene. It was a perfect time capsule. A wooden bench stood against the far wall. An old vending machine, its glass smashed, lay on its side. Dust motes, thick as insects, swarmed in their lights. The tracks were choked with debris and a fine gray powder. It was the silence that was most unnerving. On any other platform in London there would be a hum, a distant rumble, the drip of water. Here there was nothing. Sound died the moment it was born. Scanner is picking up some weird particulates in the air, Maya murmured, tapping a device on her wrist. High iron content, trace amounts of calcium. So dust and rust, Ben said, his own light tracing the edges of the platform. He ran a gloved finger along a railing, leaving a clean streak in the grime. Let's get our shots and get out. This place gives me the creeps. Relax. We need to find the old service tunnels, the ones that connect to the Strand branch. Maya was already moving, her steps confident, her light cutting decisively through the gloom. The old schematics showed a utility junction somewhere beyond the south end of the platform. Ben followed, his boots crunching on something that wasn't gravel. He angled his beam down. The gray powder wasn't powder, it was bone. Tiny fragments of bone, ground down over decades into a fine grit. Rats, most likely. He chose not to share this observation with Maya. They reached the end of the platform, where a gaping, arched tunnel promised a deeper darkness. A barrier of rotting wooden sawhorses stood in their way, festooned with chains and a single, rust-eaten sign. Ben wiped the grime away. The letters were stark white against a crimson background. Ministry of Health, Quarantine. By order of Crown Authority. Absolutely no admittance. Bingo, Maya breathed, her camera zooming in on the sign. This is the money shot. Explorers defy government quarantine. I can see the title now. This is where we turn around, Maya, Ben stated, his voice firm. This isn't a game. This is a legitimate quarantine seal. It's 60 years old, Ben. Whatever was down here is deader than disco. It's just for show. She pushed one of the sawhorses. It crumbled into a pile of rotten splinters and dust. She stepped over the remains and into the tunnel beyond. Come on. The junction must be just ahead. Ben stood for a moment, the silence pressing in. He thought about the climb to the surface, about the sirens and the living noise of the city. He could leave her, but the thought of her alone in this place, or of him having to explain to the authorities why he abandoned his partner in a condemned station, was worse than the fear coiling in his gut. With a sigh that plumed in the cold air, he followed her into the tunnel. The air here was different. It was colder, and it carried a new scent beneath the dust and damp, a faint, antiseptic smell like a long-abandoned hospital. Discarded equipment littered the floor of the service tunnel. A gurney overturned on its side, its wheels seized with rust. Glass vials shattered and empty. A single leather doctor's bag lying open, its contents spilled across the concrete. What happened here? Ben murmured, nudging a brittle gas mask with the toe of his boot. Whatever it was, they left in a hurry, Maya said, her light dancing ahead. The schematics show the junction should be right. Here. Her beam found it. It wasn't a junction. It was a wall. A wall of crudely poured concrete and reinforced steel, stretching from floor to ceiling, sealing the tunnel completely. At its center was a single, massive iron door like something from a bank vault. It had no handle, only a large, wheel-like valve in the center, secured with a thick, rusted chain and a heavy-duty padlock. Scrawled across the door in fading red paint were two words: no further. But it was the substance seeping from the seams of the door that made Ben's blood run cold. It was a thick, dark, resinous material like hardened tar. It pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, a sick, greenish light that seemed to breathe in the darkness. It looked organic. It looked alive. "What is that?" Maya whispered, the bravado finally draining from her voice. She took a hesitant step closer. "That," Ben said, his voice low and steady, "is a proper seal, and we are on the wrong side of it." He took her arm, his grip tight. "We're leaving now." He started to pull her away, but she resisted, her eyes fixed on the door. Her wrist-mounted scanner was beeping erratically. "Wait, the particulates. The concentration is off the charts here. It's coming from beyond that door." Before Ben could react, she broke free from his grasp. She unslung her pack and pulled out a heavy pair of bolt cutters. The metallic snap as she opened their jaws echoed down the tunnel like a gunshot. "Maya, don't," Ben warned, his voice a low growl. "Don't you dare." "I have to see what's inside," she said, her eyes wide with a feverish curiosity that terrified him. "Don't you? This is it, Ben. This is the secret. This is everything." She positioned the bolt cutters around the thick chain. The steel jaws bit into the rusted metal. Ben took a step forward, his hand outstretched, but he was too late. With a deafening crack that shattered the ancient silence, the lock broke. The chain fell away, clattering onto the concrete with a sound that seemed to go on forever. A low groan emanated from the door, and the strange, resinous seals began to crack, releasing a thin, vaporous mist that smelled of turned earth and sickness. The great iron wheel in the center of the door began to turn, slowly, impossibly, all on its own. Chapter 2: A Breach in Protocol. The screech of the valve turning was a physical violation. It scraped down Ben's spine, a sound of immense pressure being released. The thick iron door groaned, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the soles of their boots. A gap opened, a sliver of absolute blackness. The vaporous mist, now thicker, billowed out, swirling around their ankles. It was cold, carrying a fungal, subterranean scent mixed with something sharp and chemical. "What did you do?" Ben's voice was a choked whisper. He grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her away from the opening door. "I didn't do anything," she insisted, her headlamp beam wavering wildly between Ben's face and the growing void. "The pressure. Something was holding it shut from the inside." The door continued to swing inward, slow and inexorable, as if pushed by a great, unseen weight. It opened not into another tunnel, but into a chamber. The air that poured out was ancient and wrong. Their headlamps cut through the mist, revealing a scene of sterile, organized horror. It was a makeshift quarantine ward. Rows of military-style cots lined the walls, each one occupied. But the occupants weren't skeletons. The bodies were perfectly preserved, desiccated like mummies. Their skin was pulled taut over their bones, a pale, leathery gray, and each body was covered in a fine, shimmering patina, a crystalline growth that glittered in their lights like frost. It grew from their eyes, their mouths, their fingertips, forming delicate, branching patterns. "My God," Maya breathed, her camera panning slowly across the silent figures. Her scanner beeped insistently. "It's a fungus, a crystalline fungus. It looks like it desiccated them, preserved them." Ben felt a profound wrongness settle over him. This wasn't a plague ward, it was a tomb, a gallery. The air was thick with invisible spores, he was sure of it. He could taste a metallic tang on his tongue. "We need to go. We are breathing this stuff in." He turned, but a sound from behind them stopped him cold. A soft, melodic tink. They both froze, their beams snapping toward the source. In the center of the chamber, a figure was strapped upright to a medical gurney. It was more heavily encrusted with the crystals than the others, forming a solid, shimmering carapace. A single, large shard of the crystal, growing from its chest, had broken off and fallen to the floor. That was the sound they heard. "It's just settling," Maya reasoned, though her voice trembled. "The change in air pressure." Ben wasn't so sure. He took a cautious step away, his boots crunching on the gritty floor. The sound was unnervingly loud in the dead silence. From the figure on the gurney, another sound came. A soft, resonant chime. It was a response. "Did you hear that?" Ben asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hear what? I didn't hear anything." Maya was fiddling with her equipment, her attention divided. She knelt, picking up the fallen crystal shard. "This is incredible. The structure is almost perfect." She dropped it into a specimen bag. The clink of the crystal against the plastic was sharp, clear. Chime. This one was louder, closer. It came from the gurney again. Ben's light locked onto the figure. The crystalline head was slowly, almost imperceptibly, turning towards them. It wasn't human movement. It was the grinding, fractured motion of rock. "Maya," Ben said, his voice dangerously low. "Drop the bag slowly." "What? Why?" "The noise. It's reacting to the noise." As he spoke, the crystalline figure, the chime lick as his mind instantly branded it, made another sound. A series of soft, musical notes, like a broken wind chime stirred by a phantom breeze. Its head was now fully oriented in their direction. Its limbs began to twitch, shedding small, tinkling fragments. "Okay," Maya stammered, finally seeing it. "Okay, new plan." She slowly placed the bag on the floor. The thing on the gurney began to strain against its leather restraints. The creak of the old leather was a fresh sound, a new trigger. With a sharp crack, one of the straps snapped. An arm, encased in glittering crystal, swung free. It moved with a stiff, unnatural grace. "Run," Ben said, the single word cutting through his paralysis. They scrambled back through the iron door, their controlled exploration dissolving into panicked flight. Ben slammed his shoulder against the heavy door, trying to push it shut, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the pressure had equalized. Behind them, a series of sharp cracks echoed from the chamber. The chime lick was freeing itself. "It's no good," Ben yelled. "This way." He pulled Maya down the service tunnel, away from the platform, away from their only known exit. Their pounding footsteps were a drumbeat of terror, each one answered by the sickeningly beautiful chiming that now pursued them. It was faster than it had any right to be, a shambling, crystalline horror that filled the tunnel behind them with its relentless, melodic advance. They ran blindly, their headlamps bouncing erratically, painting the grimy walls in strobing flashes of light and shadow. The tunnel forked, left or right. There was no time to think. Ben veered left, pulling Maya with him. The chiming seemed to fade slightly. "I think we lost it," Maya panted, leaning against a damp brick wall, her chest heaving. "We didn't lose it," Ben corrected, his ears straining. "We just put a corner between us and it. It's still back there, and it's still hunting. The silence that followed was worse than the pursuit. Every drip of water, every breath, every rustle of their clothes was a potential death sentence. They stood in the dark, breathing as shallowly as they could, listening. Maya, fumbling in her pack for a spare battery, knocked a small metal multi-tool from a side pocket. It clattered on the concrete, a cascade of sharp, metallic sounds that seemed to fill the entire world. From the tunnel they had come from, the chiming started again, louder this time, faster, more furious. And it was joined by another, fainter chiming from further down the corridor. And another. It's not one, Ben realized with a surge of cold dread. It called its friends. They ran again, a new desperation fueling their flight. The tunnel twisted and turned, a maze of Edwardian brickwork. They were hopelessly lost. The way to the surface was cut off by an unknown number of these chiming abominations. They skidded around another corner and Ben saw it, a glint of metal under a pile of rubble. He kicked at the debris, uncovering a small, metal-clad door, the kind used for utility access. He grabbed the handle and pulled. It was stiff, but it moved. He wrenched it open, revealing a narrow, descending staircase. "In here," he shouted. They tumbled down the steps, pulling the heavy door shut behind them. The chiming was instantly muffled, reduced to a faint, distant tinkling. They were safe, for the moment. They were also trapped in a new, unknown section of the underground, darker and older than the last. Maya shone her light around the small landing. Her beam fell upon a skeleton, curled in a fetal position against the far wall. It was clad in the tattered remains of a 1960s-era workman's uniform. One of its bony hands still clutched a leather satchel. Ben knelt, his own light tracing the skeleton's form. There were no crystalline growths on this one. It was just bone. He gently pried the satchel from the skeleton's grip. The leather was stiff and cracked, but it held together. Inside, amongst molding papers, was a rolled-up piece of parchment, a map. He carefully unrolled it. It was a hand-drawn schematic, rendered with an architect's precision but annotated with frantic, scribbled notes. It did not show the station they had just left. It showed a sprawling network of tunnels he didn't recognize. His eyes followed the lines, searching for a path to the surface. He found none. Every route led downwards, deeper. At the bottom of the map, a single large chamber was drawn, and within it the cartographer had sketched what looked like buildings, streets, a city. A shaky arrow pointed to one of the downward tunnels, a route marked with a single, desperate word. "Exit." "What is it?" Maya asked, her voice hushed. Ben shone his light on the map, then into the oppressive darkness of the stairwell that continued its descent below them. "I think," he said, his voice hollow, "we found a way out, but it isn't the way we came in, and it isn't up." Chapter 3: The Gaslit Descent. The silence on the staircase was a thick, suffocating blanket. The distant chiming had ceased, leaving only the sound of their own ragged breathing. Ben held the map, its brittle parchment illuminated in the stark white glare of his headlamp. The ink was faded, the annotations written in a spidery, panicked scrawl. It felt less like a guide and more like a last will and testament. "This makes no sense," Maya said, peering over his shoulder. Her technical mind struggled to reconcile the drawing with reality. There's nothing on any geological survey, no record of any deep-level construction this far down. It's impossible. The quarantine ward full of crystal zombies was impossible, too, Ben countered grimly. Right now, this map is all we have. The things upstairs are between us and the surface. Down is our only direction. His logic was cold and inescapable. Their options were to wait for the chiming things to find them, or to trust the last resort of a dead man. Ben folded the map carefully and tucked it into his jacket. He took the lead, his boots finding the first step into the deeper darkness. The stairs were not concrete, but rough-hewn stone, worn smooth in the center by the passage of countless feet. The air grew colder, heavier, and carried a new, unfamiliar smell. The sharp tang of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, mixed with the damp, earthy scent of a freshly opened grave. They descended for what felt like hours. The winding staircase seemed to screw itself deeper into the earth's crust. The walls, slick with a strange, dark slime, closed in around them. There were no more signs of the underground, no tiles, no posters, no remnants of the 20th century. This was something else, something older. It was Maya who saw it first. Ben, kill your light. What, why? And just do it. Ben clicked off his headlamp. The darkness was total, a physical pressure on his eyes. For a terrifying second he was blind, adrift in an infinite void. Then he saw it. Far below, a tiny, flickering pinprick of orange light. It was faint, unsteady, but it was unmistakably a flame. Gaslight, he breathed. The word sounded absurd, anachronistic. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar sensation, flickered in his chest. They continued their descent, now guided by the distant glow. The single light became 2, then 10, then a scattered constellation of faint, flickering lamps in the immense darkness below. The staircase finally ended, opening onto a wide, stone ledge. Ben stepped out and the scale of the place hit him like a physical blow. He felt a vertiginous lurch, grabbing a nearby rock formation to steady himself. They were standing on a precipice at the edge of a cavern so vast it defied comprehension. The roof was lost in an impenetrable blackness far above, where their headlamps couldn't reach. The flickering gaslights they had seen from above were scattered across the floor of the cavern, miles below and stretching for miles beyond. And they were not just lights, they were street lamps. They illuminated a city. A city of impossible, lightless spires that clawed towards the unseen ceiling. Streets of dark, cobbled stone. Twisted Victorian townhouses, their facades decorated with bizarre, fungal growths that pulsed with their own faint, sickly luminescence. A network of rusted iron bridges spanned a great, dark chasm that cut the city in two. There was no sky. There was only the oppressive, infinite rock of the cavern roof. "It's real," Maya whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of terror and awe, her camera whirred, panning across the breathtaking, horrifying panorama. St. Giles in the deep, that's what the map called it. Ben's mind reeled. This was the source. The plague, the station, the quarantine, it was all fallout from this. This place. This civilization buried beneath London, hidden from history. From a street far below, a sound drifted up to them, thin and reedy in the vast space. It was the tolling of a bell, not the frantic alarm they had imagined, but a slow, mournful, workaday sound. His eyes followed the sound. He saw movement on the streets below. Figures, small as insects from this height, moved through the gaslit gloom. They were hunched, purposeful, clad in dark, heavy clothing. Ben raised the small pair of binoculars from his pack, his hands trembling slightly. He focused on a small square near the chasm. He saw a group of tall figures dragging something. Their movements were jerky, unnatural. They wore heavy, dark coats and what looked like tarnished copper helmets, like old-fashioned deep-sea divers. The things they were dragging were bodies. They hauled them to the edge of the chasm and with a synchronized, practiced motion, heaved them into the darkness. They were a sanitation crew, a monstrous, nightmarish sanitation crew. "The Copper Jacks," Ben murmured, the name coming unbidden from the map's frantic annotations. He panned the binoculars across the city. He saw a figure near one of the larger buildings, working with a hammer and chisel. As the figure turned, Ben saw that he was not working with stone. He was working with bone. Great, pale femurs and ribcage were being mortared into the wall, a structural reinforcement of human remains. The bone mason. Everywhere he looked, there was a quiet, functioning horror. Children with pale faces and oversized eyes watched from shadowed doorways. The hushed children. A hunched figure shuffled along a street, his hands clutching a bundle of what looked like greasy rags, tending to the gaslights. The Tallow Man. This wasn't a ruin. It was a living, breathing society built on principles that made his surface world morality utterly meaningless. "We can't go down there," Maya said, her voice flat with shock. She had lowered her camera, her obsession with documenting forgotten in the face of this impossible reality. "Those things, they aren't human." "Their ancestors were," Ben said, his mind racing. "This is a Victorian city. They must have been trapped down here. For a century and a half they've been adapting." He looked at the path leading down from their ledge, a narrow, treacherous track carved into the cavern wall. "We don't have a choice, Maya. We're out of food, low on water, and our batteries won't last forever. Down there is our only chance of finding another way out, or at least of surviving another day." His words sounded hollow even to him. Surviving for what? To become part of this nightmare. To be raw material for the bone mason or food for whatever lived in the chasm. A noise from the staircase behind them made the decision for them. A faint, unmistakable tink. They froze, beams snapping back to the entrance. A single crystalline shard lay on the top step as if it had been deliberately placed there. A calling card. The chime lick or one of its brethren had found their trail. It was patient. It was waiting. Ben looked at the terrifying city below. Then he looked at the dark staircase behind them, where a melodic, patient death awaited. He had never felt so trapped, so utterly out of his depth. "The city it is," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He started down the path, his boots skidding on the loose scree. "Stay close, and for God's sake, stay quiet." The descent into St. Giles in the Deep had begun. Each step took them further from the world of the sun and deeper into the heart of the earth's darkest secret. Chapter 4. The Tallow Man's Quarter. The path down the cavern wall was a treacherous ribbon of rock and dread. Loose shale skittered from under their boots, vanishing into the colossal darkness below. Ben moved with a climber's caution, testing each handhold, his gaze flicking between the path and the impossible city growing larger beneath them. Maya followed, her earlier bravado replaced by a grim, silent focus. The scale of the city was oppressive. It was a cancer in the heart of the world. They reached the outskirts, where the structured city bled into the raw cavern floor. Here, the buildings were less formal, more like hovels carved from the rock itself, plastered with mud and a phosphorescent fungus that cast a pale green glow. The air was thick and wet, smelling of rot and mold and the ever-present tang of ozone. It was a slum at the edge of a nightmare. "We need to find cover," Ben whispered, his voice swallowed by the immense space. "Get our bearings, figure out the layout." They slipped into the shadow of a monolithic fungal growth, shaped like a great, drooping mushroom. From here, they had a view of one of the main thoroughfares. The cobblestones were slick with a dark, greasy slime. The gaslights hissed, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. A copperjack patrol marched past, their heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoing off the stone facades. Their movements were synchronized, their heads encased in those terrifying copper helmets, never turning. They were the city's immune system, patrolling for foreign bodies. Ben pulled out the map, but it was almost useless now. The drawing was a schematic, a spiderweb of lines. It couldn't capture the three-dimensional, chaotic reality of the city. He could identify the basalt spire, a jagged tower of black rock that dominated the city's center, and the great chasm, but navigating the labyrinth of streets between them was another matter. They were forced to move, flitting from one pool of shadow to the next. The city was quiet but not silent. There was a constant, low hum, a vibration that seemed to come from the rock itself. And there were other sounds, a distant, pained scream cut off abruptly, a soft, wet slithering from a grate in the street, the sound of the veiled choir, a droning, monotonous chant that drifted from the direction of the city's heart. The city was a predator and they were prey, acutely aware of their foreignness. Their clothes were wrong, their gear was wrong, the very scent of the surface world clung to them. A hush child, its face a pale oval in the gloom of a doorway, watched them pass, its dark eyes following them without expression. It didn't raise an alarm. It just watched. The silent judgment was almost worse than a shout. They turned down a narrower alley, this one lit only by the glowing fungus on the walls. It seemed deserted. The walls were lined with niches, each containing a rendering vat filled with a thick, tallow-like substance. Bundles of rushes soaked in the vats, destined to become torches. This was the tallow man's quarter. A shape detached itself from the shadows. It was a man if the stooped, skeletal creature before them could be called that. He was draped in greasy rags, his skin the color of old parchment. His eyes, sunk deep in their sockets, fixed on the beams of their headlamps with a hungry, desperate greed. He held a long, hooked pole. This was Hezekiah Crowell. "Light," the tallow man rasped, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. "Bright, bright, give it to Crowell." He took a shuffling step forward, his pole extended. "Stay back," Ben warned, taking a step back himself. He didn't want a confrontation. Noise was death here. But Maya, her nerves frayed, reacted. "Get away from us," she yelled, her voice sharp and loud. It was a fatal mistake. The tallow man recoiled not from her words but from the volume. He hissed, baring blackened gums. And from the main street a new sound arose, a low metallic wheeze, the sound of a copperjack's respirator. Maya, shut up, Ben hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her deeper into the alley. The wheezing grew louder, closer. A hulking shadow fell across the alley's entrance. A copperjack stood there, its clouded porthole faceplate turned towards them. It raised its hush bat, a heavy truncheon wrapped in thick layers of cloth. It didn't run. It just advanced, its steps slow and implacable. The tallow man, forgotten, cackled a dry, rasping laugh. Fools, loud fools, the jacks will quiet you for the tallow vats. There was no escape. The alley was a dead end. The copperjack advanced, its wheezing breath filling the narrow space. Ben pushed Maya behind him, his mind racing, searching for a weapon, an escape, anything. The hulking enforcer raised its club. Suddenly, a section of the wall beside them slid inward. A hand, thin and grimy, shot out and grabbed the front of Ben's jacket. "This way, surface man, if you want to live." The voice was female, sharp and commanding. Ben, having no other option, let himself be pulled into the opening. He hauled Maya in after him just as the wall slid shut, plunging them into absolute darkness. The thud of the copperjack's hushbat striking the stone where they had been standing echoed through the wall. A moment later, a small flame sputtered to life, illuminating the face of their rescuer. She was a woman, perhaps in her 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her face was smudged with dirt, and her hair was a tangled mess, but she held herself with a fierce, coiled energy. She held a small, primitive friction lighter. This was Katrin. "You are loud," she said, her voice a low, accusatory whisper. "Loud and stupid. You would have been rendered by now." "Who are you?" Maya asked, her voice shaky. Katrin ignored her, her eyes fixed on Ben. "I know what you are. You stink of the sky, of the sun. I have not smelled that scent since I was a girl." She took a step closer, her gaze intense. "You seek a way out. There is no way out. There is only down." "The map," Ben started. "The map leads to the mother," Katrin interrupted, a flicker of something fear or perhaps reverence in her eyes. "And you do not want to meet the mother, not yet." She looked them up and down, a predator assessing new livestock. "But you are new. You have things I need, tools, knowledge. Perhaps you are not entirely useless." "What do you want?" Ben asked, cutting to the chase. A slow, cunning smile spread across Katrin's face. "Lord Sallow, who rules this pit from his basalt spire, keeps records, old things, schematics from the first generation, from your world." Her eyes glinted in the flickering light. "I want them. They show the location of the old ventilation shafts, not an exit, but a weakness in his fortress." "You want us to break into the fortress of the guy who runs this entire nightmare city?" Maya asked, her voice incredulous. "You are outsiders," Katrin said simply. "No one will recognize you. You can move in the shadows where my face is known and hunted. You do this for me," she paused, letting the offer hang in the air, "and I will guide you. I will teach you how to survive in the deep, how to avoid the drip maws and the chime liches. I will show you the safe paths. Without me, you will be dead or gifted before the next bell." Ben looked at Maya, whose face was a mask of fear and uncertainty. He looked at Katrin, whose offer was a poisoned chalice. But she was right. They were out of their depth, lambs in a slaughterhouse. Their technology, their surface world logic, it was useless here. They needed a guide. They needed a witch. "And if we refuse?" Ben asked. Katrin's smile vanished. She extinguished the flame with a pinch of her fingers, plunging them once more into absolute, suffocating blackness. Her voice came out of the void, a cold, final whisper. "Then I will open the door and give your loud mouths back to the copper jacks." Chapter 5. The Grand Ossuary. The darkness Katrin plunged them into was absolute, a void that stripped them of all senses save the sound of their own panicked breathing and the chilling finality of her words. Ben felt a primal fear clutch at him, the terror of being helpless, of being a pawn in a game whose rules he couldn't comprehend. Before the silence could stretch into madness, the friction lighter sputtered back to life, the small flame a fragile shield against the oppressive black. "You learn quickly, surface man," Katrin said, her sharp eyes studying Ben's face. There was a grudging respect in her tone. "Good. Stupidity is a fatal disease in the deep." "We'll do it," Ben said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We'll get your schematics, but you guide us, you protect us." "I will keep you alive," she corrected. "Protection is a luxury the dead cannot afford. Now, give me one of your light sticks." She pointed a grimy finger at the headlamp on Ben's forehead. Reluctantly, Ben unstrapped the lamp and handed it over. Katrin examined it with a practiced, avaricious curiosity, her fingers tracing its plastic casing, her thumb finding the switch. She clicked it on. The powerful lead beam flared to life, a miniature sun in the cramped space. She hissed and shielded her eyes, but a grin of triumph spread across her face. "The sun," she whispered, her voice filled with a strange reverence. She clicked it off. "This will be useful. The lamplighter fears such brightness." "The lamplighter?" Maya asked, her voice still trembling. "Another of Sallow's pets," Katrin dismissed, tucking the headlamp into a pouch at her belt. "A story for another time. We must move. The Jacks will not search this hovel. They fear my hexes more than they obey their master, but they will patrol this quarter with new vigor." She led them through a maze of narrow tunnels behind her home, a secret network of crawl spaces and bolt holes that ran like veins through the city's bones. The air was thick with the scent of mold and something else, a coppery, metallic smell that grew stronger as they moved. They emerged into a vast, vaulted chamber that took Ben's breath away. It was a cathedral of the dead. The walls, the ceiling, the great pillars that supported the cavernous roof, all were constructed from human bone. Femurs formed intricate lattices, skulls were set in geometric patterns, and spinal columns were wound into decorative spirals. The scale of it was monstrous, a testament to generations of death. This was the Grand Ossuary, the workshop of Master Grendel, the bone mason, and it was the only route to the lower levels of the basalt spire. Gaslights set in skull sconces cast a flickering, macabre glow over the scene. In the center of the chamber, a hulking figure worked, his back to them. He was a giant of a man, his bare arms corded with muscle. He was humming a tuneless, droning melody as he worked, using a thick, grayish mortar to set a rib cage into a newly constructed archway. "Master Grendel," Katrin whispered, her voice tight with caution. "He hears everything. The vibration of a misplaced foot, the whisper of cloth. He is more animal than man. We must cross the length of this chamber to reach the spire's foundations. We will move only when he moves. We will step only when his hammer falls." It was a terrifying prospect. They were to play a deadly game of grandmother's footsteps with a cannibal architect in a cathedral of his victims. Katrin gave a sharp nod, her eyes fixed on the bone mason. Grendel grunted, picking up a heavy, femur-headed mallet. He swung it, and with a wet, cracking sound, shattered a pile of leg bones to create a finer aggregate for his mortar. Crack! Katrin darted forward, her bare feet making no sound on the bone-strewn floor. Ben and Maya followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. They moved 10 feet before Grendel straightened up, his great, shaggy head turning as if sensing a change in the air. They froze behind a pillar of skulls. The bone mason sniffed the air, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He seemed to stare directly at their hiding place, his eyes lost in the shadows of a heavy brow. Ben held his breath, every muscle tensed. After a long, agonizing moment, Grendel shrugged his massive shoulders and turned back to his work. Crack! They moved again. Another 10 feet. Another pillar. The process repeated, a nerve-shredding rhythm of sound and silence. They were halfway across the chamber when Maya stumbled. Her foot caught on a loose tibia, sending it skittering across the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent hall. Grendel spun around, a roar of fury erupting from his throat. His eyes, small and black and filled with a feral intelligence, locked onto them. He dropped his mallet and charged, his heavy boots thudding on the stone floor, a sound like a war drum. "Split up," Katrin screamed, her own advice about silence forgotten in the face of the immediate threat. She darted to the left, disappearing behind a stack of yet-to-be-used skeletons. Ben shoved Maya to the right. "Go, I'll draw him off." He didn't wait for an answer. He ran deeper into the ossuary, his boots crunching on the bone-littered floor. The bone mason, seeing him as the primary threat, altered his course, his roar of rage echoing through the chamber. Ben was faster, more agile, but the chamber was Grendel's home turf. Ben dodged around a pillar, ducked under a low-hanging archway of pelvic bones, and scrambled up a pile of skulls. He risked a glance back. Grendel was gaining on him, his massive hands reaching. Ben saw a heavy chain hanging from the ceiling, part of a primitive block-and-tackle system used to lift sections of bone wall into place. He leapt, his fingers wrapping around the cold, rusted links. He swung his body, his momentum carrying him up and over a low wall made of compressed vertebrae. He landed hard on the other side, rolling to his feet. He was in a smaller, more private workshop. Workbenches were littered with finer tools, chisels, saws, drills, all fashioned from sharpened bone and flint. But it was the project on the central table that made his stomach churn. It was a partially assembled figure, a human form crafted from the skeletons of children, their small bones wired together with gut. It was a grotesque doll, a plaything for a monster. Grendel appeared in the archway, his huge frame blocking the only exit. He was panting, his eyes burning with a furious proprietary light. He was no longer roaring. He was silent, which was somehow more terrifying. He stalked into the room, his intentions clear. Ben backed away, his eyes scanning the workbench for a weapon. He saw a long, sharpened fibula, a primitive but effective-looking spear. He grabbed it, its polished surface cool and smooth in his hand. "Get back," Ben said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He held the bone spear in a two-handed grip. Grendel just grinned, a horrific sight of blackened teeth and gums. He took another step forward. He was toying with him. From the main chamber, a new sound arose, a clear, piercing, melodic chime. Tink, tinkle, chime. Grendel froze. His head snapped towards the sound, a look of pure, primal fear on his face. The bone mason, the monster of the ossuary, was afraid of something else. The chiming grew louder, closer. It was coming from the entrance to the chamber, the way Ben and Maya had come in. The chime lick had followed them, and it had found them. Grendel let out a low, guttural moan. He looked at Ben, then at the archway. He was trapped between an intruder and a terror he understood all too well. With a final, desperate roar, he turned and smashed his way through a section of the workshop wall, a shower of bone and mortar exploding into the darkness beyond. He was creating his own exit, fleeing into the unmapped tunnels. Ben didn't hesitate. He ran for the archway Grendel had abandoned, back into the main chamber. The chiming was loud now, echoing through the vast space. He saw Maya and Katrin huddled behind a far pillar, and at the chamber's entrance he saw it, the chime lick. It stood there, its crystalline form shimmering in the gaslight, its head tilted as if listening. It took a hesitant, shambling step inside. "Ben," Maya screamed, her voice a magnet for the creature. The chime lick's head snapped towards her. It began to move, faster now, its melodic chiming becoming a frantic, discordant jangle. It was crossing the chamber, heading directly for Maya and Katrin. They were frozen in terror. Ben ran, not away, but on a parallel course to the creature. He scooped up a skull from a pile on the floor. "Hey," he yelled, his voice raw. "Over here." The chime lick stopped. Its head, a solid mass of glittering crystal, swiveled towards him. It had no eyes, but Ben felt its attention lock onto him, cold and absolute. He threw the skull as hard as he could. It sailed across the chamber and smashed against a far wall 100 yards away. The sound of the impact, a sharp, explosive crack, echoed through the ossuary. The chime lick instantly abandoned its pursuit of Maya. It turned and shambled with single-minded purpose towards the source of the new, louder sound. It was a simple, programmable horror. "Now," Katrin's voice cut through the air, "to the spire before it loses interest." Ben didn't need telling twice. He sprinted towards them, his lungs burning, the terrifying jangle of the chime lick receding behind them as it investigated the decoy. They reached a low, dark opening at the base of the chamber, hidden behind a tapestry woven from human hair. It was an entrance to the foundations of the basalt spire. They scrambled through, Katrin pulling the grotesque tapestry back into place. They were in a narrow service corridor, carved from the black rock of the spire itself. They were inside. Ben leaned against the cold stone wall, panting, his body shaking with adrenaline. He had survived. They had all survived. But the cost was becoming terrifyingly clear. He was learning the rules of this nightmare world. He was adapting. And a part of him, a cold, terrified part, wondered what he would have to become to make it out alive. Chapter 6. The Heart of the Spire. The service tunnels of the basalt spire were a stark contrast to the organic chaos of the city. Here, the walls were smooth, cold, and unnervingly geometric. Carved from the black, volcanic rock of the spire itself, the corridors were narrow and oppressive, designed for function, not comfort. The air was dry and still, carrying the scent of ozone and old paper. The only light came from their headlamps now, Katrin having reclaimed the one from Ben. "Sallow's domain," she whispered, her voice a low hum that was barely audible over the scuff of their boots. "The rock swallows sound here. We can speak, but do not shout. The spire has ears other than Grendel." They moved through the labyrinthine corridors, following Katrin's unerring sense of direction. The map was useless here. This section was a blank space on the dead man's parchment. They passed heavy iron doors, each one bearing a stenciled symbol, a gear, a vial, a stylized flame. "What are these rooms?" Maya asked, her curiosity wrestling with her fear. She had her camera running again, the small red light a comforting, familiar presence in the alien darkness. "The workshops, where the first generation tried to replicate the world they lost," Katrin explained, her voice tight. "Geothermal forges, hydroponics, alchemy, all failed. The deep gives only what it wishes to give. Now they are just storehouses, tombs for dead ideas." She stopped before a door marked with a simple, elegant drawing of an open book. "The archive. This is it." The door was not locked. Katrin pushed it open and it swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. The room beyond was vast, circular, and breathtaking. It was a library. Shelves carved directly from the black rock stretched from the floor to the vaulted ceiling 30 feet above, all of them filled with books. Leather-bound volumes, their spines gleaming in the lamplight. In the center of the room, a single, ornate desk stood on a raised dais. "All of this, from the surface?" Ben asked, his voice filled with awe. He ran a finger along a row of books. Shakespeare, Dickens, a complete set of the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1888. It was a time capsule of Victorian knowledge, a treasure trove of a lost world. "The first generation brought them. They believed knowledge would save them," Katrin said, a cynical edge to her voice. "It did not, but the records of their own work, those are more valuable." She pointed to a section of shelves behind the main desk. "The Sallow archives, all the records of the city's founding, every experiment, every failure, the schematics will be there." Leaving Katrin to stand guard at the door, Ben and Maya moved towards the desk. The air of quiet scholarship was a thin veneer over the city's inherent horror. The silence was too perfect, the order too rigid. As they passed the desk, Maya's light caught something on its polished surface. It was a teacup half full. A thin wisp of steam still rose from it. They froze. They were not alone. From the shadows behind the tallest shelf, a figure emerged. He was tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in a perfectly tailored Victorian suit of black silk. His skin was the color of bleached parchment, his hair a fine silver white. He had a scholar's stoop, but his eyes, a pale, washed-out gray, held a chilling intelligence. He held a single, leather-bound book in his long, slender fingers. This was Lord Sallow. "New additions to my collection," he said, his voice soft, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. It carried across the room with effortless clarity. "I confess, I did not expect visitors from the overworld. It has been such a long time." Katrin at the door drew a long, sharpened bone knife from her belt, but she did not move. She was trapped. Sallow's gaze drifted from Ben to Maya, his eyes lingering on her camera. "Ah, a recording device, how quaint. We have long since abandoned such transient technologies. We prefer a more permanent record." He gestured to the books that surrounded them. "We don't want any trouble," Ben said, raising his hand slowly. "We're just trying to find a way home." "Home," Sallow gave a thin, bloodless smile. "This is your home now. The city provides, the city protects, the city consumes. That is the great truth of our existence." He took a step towards them, his movements slow and deliberate. "You are contaminants. Your very presence, the scent of the sun on your skin, the frantic beat of your surface hearts, it upsets the balance. You must be purified, cleansed." "We're not going to be your next experiment," Maya shot back, her fear manifesting as defiance. Sallow's smile widened. "Experiment? My dear girl, the experimental phase concluded generations ago. We are now in a state of perfect symbiosis with our host. The plague, as your ancestors so crudely called it, is not a disease. It is a sacrament, a gift from the mother. It strips away the unnecessary, the weak, the fearful. It leaves only the essential structure. It makes us eternal. It makes us part of the deep itself." He was a high priest of the apocalypse, a zealot who had turned his people's damnation into a religion. Ben knew then that they could not reason with him. "You've been luring people down here," Ben realized, the pieces clicking into place. "The sealed station, the quarantine. It's not to keep people out, it's a filter. Only the most determined, the most curious make it through. You're curating your victims." "Victims?" Sallow looked almost offended. "They are acolytes. They provide the city with new substance, new memory. We are all part of the great library." He gestured to the walls. "Tell me, what do you think the paper is made from?" A wave of nausea washed over Ben as he looked at the pristine white pages of the books. He saw the faint, fibrous texture. He thought of the tallow man's vats, of the bone mason's mortar. Nothing was wasted in St. Giles in the deep. Sallow took another step. "Now about your purification. It is a process that requires stillness." From the shadows behind him, two more figures emerged. Copper Jacks. They moved with a terrifying silence in the sound-dampening room, their hulking forms flanking their master. Their clouded portholes seemed to absorb the light. This was it, a dead end. Trapped in the heart of the enemy's fortress, with his monstrous guards sealing the only exit. Then Katrin acted. With a scream of pure, animal fury, she threw her knife. It spun end over end, not at Sallow, but at a large, ornate gas lamp hanging from the ceiling near the desk. The bone tip shattered the glass housing. Gas hissed into the room. At the same time, she clicked on the headlamp she held. The powerful lead beam a blinding flash in the dim light. She shone it directly into the face of one of the copper jacks. The creature recoiled, raising a hand to its faceplate as if in pain. Sallow, momentarily blinded, staggered back. "Insolent witch, you will be rendered for this." "Run!" Katrin screamed, already moving towards a dark alcove Ben hadn't noticed before. Ben grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her away from the desk. The second copperjack was already moving to intercept them, its hushbat raised. The room was filling with the flammable gas. A single spark would incinerate them all. Ben did the only thing he could. He shoved a towering shelf of books. It groaned, balanced precariously for a moment, and then toppled over with a thunderous crash, not of paper, but of something heavier, more solid. It slammed into the advancing copperjack, burying it under an avalanche of preserved history. They scrambled into the alcove after Katrin. It was another hidden passage, narrow and dark. Behind them, Lord Sallow's voice rose in a shriek of fury, a sound that cracked his calm, cultured facade. "Seal the archive. Do not let them escape." The sound of the remaining copperjack's heavy boots stomping towards them echoed from the library. They were running again, deeper into the spire, with the city's master and his enforcers on their heels. They had the schematics. Katrin had snatched a bundle of scrolls from a drawer in the chaos, but they had also declared war on the king of this subterranean hell. They were no longer just lost. They were fugitives. Chapter 7. The Meyerwitch's Bargain. The secret passage was a claustrophobic nightmare. It twisted and turned, sloping downwards, the black rock walls scraping against their shoulders. Katrin led the way, the stolen headlamp cutting a frantic path through the darkness. The furious shouts of Lord Sallow and the heavy tread of the pursuing copperjack faded behind them, replaced by the sound of their own panicked gasps for air. Finally, the tunnel opened up, not into a room, but onto a narrow, crumbling ledge overlooking a colossal, lightless space. The air here was different, wet, heavy, and thick with the smell of decay and fungal growth. Below them, a vast, subterranean swamp stretched as far as their lights could penetrate, its surface broken by twisted, mangrove-like fungi and bubbling pools of black, stagnant water. This was the mire, the city's sewer and dumping ground. "We've lost them," Katrin panted, leaning against the rock wall. She held up the bundle of scrolls she'd taken from the archive, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "I have it." "You have it." Maya's voice was sharp, accusatory. "We almost died in there. We're trapped at the bottom of the world with a whole city of monsters hunting us, and all you care about are these stupid papers." "These stupid papers are our only hope," Katrin shot back, her voice fierce. She unrolled one of the scrolls. It was a detailed cross-section of the basalt spire. "Sallow's power comes from his control of the deep, the geothermal vents, the water cisterns. He controls the city's lifeblood. These schematics, they show the conduits, the weaknesses." "I thought they were our way out," Ben said, his voice flat. He felt a profound weariness seep into his bones. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a cold, gnawing despair. Katrin looked at him, her expression softening for a moment. "There is no out, surface man, not the way you mean. The first generation tried, they dug up, but the rock of the world is too thick. They tried to go sideways, but the tunnels always led back here. The deep holds what it takes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But there is a way to survive, a way to not be Sallow's cattle, a way to fight back. She was a revolutionary, he realized, a freedom fighter in a kingdom of the damned. Her quest wasn't for escape, but for rebellion, and they were now her unwilling soldiers. "So what now?" Maya asked, gesturing to the terrifying swamp below. "We just live here with you in your mud hut." "My home is safe," Katrin said defensively. "Safer than any other place in the deep, and now we have a weapon." She tapped the scrolls. "But Sallow will not rest. He has been defied. His property has been stolen. He will send everything he has after us. The jacks, the glimmerwings to track our scent, perhaps even the lamplighter itself." Ben's stomach tightened at the name. "You said you. Tell us what that is." Katrin's face grew grim. She extinguished the headlamp, plunging them into the near-total darkness of the mire, lit only by patches of faint, phosphorescent moss. "The lamplighter is one of Sallow's triumphs of purification. It was a man, one of the first generation, obsessed with fire, with light. When the plague took him, it twisted his obsession. He is drawn to light, drawn to heat, but he doesn't bring light, he consumes it." She paused, her voice dropping lower. "Where he walks, the gaslights gutter and die, the fungi dim. The very heat is leached from the air, leaving a patch of absolute, killing cold. He is a walking void, and Sallow will use him to hunt us in the dark." A new, more profound terror settled over Ben. It wasn't just the monsters you could see, the things you could fight. It was the conceptual horrors, the things that broke the laws of physics. From the tunnel behind them, a sound echoed. The unmistakable, rhythmic wheezing of a copperjack's respirator. It was followed by a strange, flapping sound, and a faint, blue light began to pulse in the darkness of the passage. "Glimmerwings," Katrin hissed, her body tensing. "They've found our trail. We have to go, now." She pointed to a thick, gnarled root that snaked down from their ledge into the swamp below. "Down. It is our only way." Ben looked down into the black, bubbling water. He had no idea what lived in there. Sump serpents, trench scuttlers, things for which he had no name. But the sound of the approaching copperjack and the poolsing blue light left him no choice. He slung his pack high on his shoulders and grabbed the root. It was slick with slime, but it was thick and strong. He began the perilous descent. Maya followed, her face a pale mask of terror. Katrin came last, the precious scrolls tucked securely inside her tunic. They were halfway down when the copperjack appeared on the ledge above them. It was a single, hulking figure, its copper helmet silhouetted against the poolsing blue light of the glimmerwing moths that swarmed around it. It didn't try to climb down. It simply raised a long, pole-like weapon. It wasn't a hush-bat. It was a harpoon gun, a relic from some forgotten whaling expedition. It aimed, the weapon steady in its grip. Ben's heart seized. They were exposed, helpless. Suddenly, a shape dropped from a ledge above the copperjack, a creature of pure, predatory nightmare. It looked like a melted, semi-translucent stalactite, a thing of sinew and dripping slime. It landed silently on the copperjack's back, its circular, needle-toothed mouth gaping wide. The drip maw. The copperjack let out a single, muffled grunt as the creature's maw clamped down on its helmeted head. The thick copper crumpled like tin foil. The creature's paralytic venom must have been instantaneous. The copperjack didn't even scream. It just went rigid, its harpoon gun clattering onto the ledge. The drip maw, its meal secured, began to drag the paralyzed enforcer back into the shadows of the ceiling. Ben, Maya, and Katrin watched, frozen from the root. They had been saved, but by a horror far worse than the one that had been about to kill them. It was a visceral reminder of the mire's brutal ecosystem. They reached the bottom, their boots sinking into the soft, yielding muck of the swamp floor. They were in Katrin's territory now. She led them through the treacherous landscape with an expert's confidence, navigating the bubbling pits and avoiding the grasping, thorny vines. She led them to her home. It was a hovel, woven from roots and mud and reinforced with scavenged pieces of rusted metal, built into the base of one of the largest fungal trees. It was small, cramped, and smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, but it was dry, and it felt safe. Katrin lit a small, smoky fire in a stone hearth. In its flickering light, she spread the stolen scrolls out on the floor. Ben and Maya huddled near the flames, the oppressive chill of the mire seeping from their bones. "Here," Katrin said, her finger tracing a line on one of the schematics. "The main geothermal conduit. It runs directly beneath Sallow's throne room. It powers the entire spire, if it were to be ruptured." "An explosion?" Ben asked. "It would bring the whole place down on top of us." "No," Katrin said, a cunning light in her eyes. "Not an explosion, a release. The pressure from the vent is immense. A controlled breach would vent superheated steam and gas directly into the upper levels. It would cook Sallow and his personal guard alive. It would cripple his power base. The city would fall into chaos, and in the chaos, a new order could be built." It was a mad plan, a suicidal plan, but as Ben looked at the determined set of Katrin's jaw, he knew she was serious. This was her life's work, her grand, desperate gambit to free her people from a tyrant. "How do we even get there?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The spire will be on high alert." Katrin rolled up the scroll. "The conduit has maintenance tunnels. They run from the mire through the old city all the way to the spire. They are deep, dark, unused for generations." A shadow crossed her face. "They are not empty. They are the hunting grounds of the trench scuttlers." Ben felt a familiar cold dread. Every solution in this world was just a doorway to a new, more profound horror. Escape the copperjacks, face the drip maw. Escape Lord Sallow, face the scuttlers. "We have no choice," he said, the words feeling alien in his own mouth. He was no longer just a lost explorer. He was a conspirator, a saboteur. "Tell us what we need to do." Katrin looked at him, then at Maya. She saw the fear in their eyes, but she also saw a flicker of something else. A hard, desperate resolve. They were changing. The deep was changing them. "Good," she said, offering a small, grim smile. "Rest, eat. You will need your strength. Tomorrow we go hunting a king." Chapter 8. The Sound of Silence. Sleep was a luxury they could not afford. Ben dozed in fits, his dreams a feverish slideshow of glittering crystals and clouded copper helmets. He awoke to the smell of something cooking. Katrin was hunched over the fire, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon. She offered him a bowl of the gray, lumpy stew. It smelled vaguely of mushrooms and mud. Ben ate it without question. Hunger had overridden revulsion. Maya sat huddled in a corner, cleaning her camera lens with a scrap of cloth. It was a small, familiar ritual that seemed to keep her tethered to the person she used to be. Her face was pale, her eyes dark with a fear that had settled deep into her bones. "The maintenance tunnels are treacherous," Katrin began, her voice low and serious as she spread the schematics on the mud floor again. "They are a maze, and they are not empty. The scuttlers are the least of our worries." "What could be worse than feral, cannibalistic humans?" Maya asked, her voice brittle. "Silence," Katrin answered simply. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. "There are sections of the old tunnels where the rock is different. It absorbs all sound, all of it. Your voice, your footsteps, even the beat of your own heart. In these zones you are utterly alone. Many have gone mad in the silence. But it is the silence itself that is the true danger." Ben felt a prickle of unease. "What do you mean?" "There are things that live in the deep," she explained, her eyes distant, "that can only exist where there is no vibration, no noise. They are drawn to the silent zones. We call them the hush. You do not see them. You do not hear them. You only know they are there when your friend, walking beside you, simply ceases to be." The conceptual horror of it was worse than any monster with teeth and claws. An enemy you could not detect, that killed without a sound. "We will need to make noise," Katrin continued. "Constant noise, but not too much. A shout will bring scuttlers. A whisper will attract the hush. We must find a balance." She looked at their equipment. "Your technology, does it make sounds?" Maya's eyes lit up, a flicker of her old self returning. "I have a signal generator. It can emit frequencies, white noise, pink noise. I can set it to a steady, low-level broadcast." "Good," Katrin nodded. "That will be our shield, a wall of sound to keep the silence at bay." They prepared for the journey. Katrin armed them with sharpened bone knives and gave them pouches filled with a pungent, sticky moss. "For the wounds," she explained. "It stings like hell, but it stops the bleeding and keeps the rot out." They set out, leaving the relative safety of the hovel and venturing back into the mire. Katrin led them to a fissure in the ground, almost completely hidden by a thick curtain of dangling fungal strands. A rusted iron ladder descended into the blackness. "The entrance," Katrin said. "From here we follow the conduit. May the deep forgive us for what we are about to do." The maintenance tunnel was a perfect circle of corroded iron, just wide enough for them to walk single file. A massive pipe, the geothermal conduit, ran along one side, warm to the touch. It was coated in a century of grime and a strange, slimy moss. The air was hot, humid, and smelled of sulfur and rust. Maya switched on her signal generator. A low, static hiss filled the tunnel, a comforting blanket of sound. It wasn't loud, but it was constant. They moved forward, their headlamps cutting through the oppressive dark. The tunnel was a disorienting, featureless tube that seemed to stretch on forever. They walked for what felt like hours, the constant hiss of the white noise, and the rhythmic drip of condensation, the only markers of time's passage. They saw the first signs of the scuttlers soon after. Crude symbols were scratched into the grime on the walls, territorial markers. Then they found the bones. Human bones, gnawed clean, scattered on the floor. A sound cut through the white noise. A sharp, high-pitched clicking coming from a side tunnel up ahead. "Scouts," Katrin whispered, her body instantly tense. She clicked off her headlamp. Ben and Maya did the same. The darkness was absolute. The hissing of the white noise was their only anchor. The clicking grew closer. They flattened themselves against the cold, curved wall of the tunnel, holding their breath. A figure appeared at the edge of their vision, a silhouette against the faint glow of some distant phosphorescent fungus. It was a trench scuttler. It moved on all fours, its head twitching from side to side, sniffing the air. Its body was emaciated, its limbs long and spidery. It was blind, its face a smooth canvas of pale skin. It paused, its head cocked, listening. It could hear the white noise. It let out a series of inquisitive clicks. From deeper in the side tunnel, more clicks answered. A pack. The scuttler took a tentative step into their tunnel, its long, clawed fingers scraping against the iron floor. Ben's hand tightened on his bone knife. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. Suddenly, Maya's signal generator sputtered. The steady hiss faltered, replaced by a garbled, stuttering static. The battery was failing. The scuttler froze, its head snapping directly towards them. The change in the sound had pinpointed their location. It let out a piercing, chittering shriek, a hunting cry. From the side tunnel, a chorus of shrieks answered. They were coming. "Move!" Katrin yelled, abandoning all pretense of stealth. She switched on her light and ran. They sprinted down the tunnel, the sound of dozens of skittering claws echoing behind them. The scuttlers were fast, their movements a horrifying, insect-like scuttling. A glance over his shoulder showed Ben a swarm of the pale, blind creatures pouring out of the side tunnel, their eyeless faces pointed towards them. Maya fumbled with her device, trying to swap the battery, but her hands were shaking too much. The white noise died completely. A silence. A profound, deafening silence. Ben's own footsteps, his own ragged breathing, vanished. The shrieks of the pursuing scuttlers were gone. It was as if the world had been muted. They had entered one of the dead zones. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. A wave of vertigo washed over Ben. He felt disconnected from his own body, a ghost in a machine. He could see Katrin and Maya running ahead of him, their movements frantic, but they were utterly silent. It was like watching a broken film. He looked back. The scuttlers had stopped at the edge of the silent zone. They paced back and forth, shrieking soundlessly, but they would not enter. They were terrified of the silence. Ben felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. Katrin was looking around, her eyes wide with a new, more profound terror. She pointed a trembling finger at the wall beside Maya. Ben's eyes followed her gesture, and he saw it. The wall was moving. A patch of the grimy, rusted iron about the size of a man was rippling like heat haze on a summer road. It detached itself from the wall, a two-dimensional shadow peeling away from the surface. It had no features, no substance. It was a hole in reality, a slice of pure void, a hush. It drifted silently towards Maya. She hadn't seen it. She was still fumbling with her generator, her back to the thing. Maya, Ben screamed, but no sound came out. His throat worked, his mouth formed the shape of her name, but the silence swallowed the word before it was born. He was trapped in a vacuum. He ran towards her, his legs feeling heavy, disconnected. He reached out to grab her, to pull her away. The hush was only inches from her now. Katrin was faster. She grabbed a handful of loose stones from the tunnel floor. She didn't throw them at the creature. She threw them at the wall, right at the edge of the dead zone, where the sound of the pursuit had cut off. The stones flew from the silent zone into the zone of sound. The moment they crossed the invisible barrier, their impact on the iron wall was an explosive cacophony, a series of sharp, loud cracks that shattered the unnatural quiet. The hush recoiled from the sudden eruption of noise as if struck by a physical blow. It wavered, its form dissolving, and flowed back into the wall, becoming one with the rust and grime again. At the same moment, the pursuing scuttlers, drawn by the new sound, surged forward, crossing the threshold into the silent zone. Their terror of the silence was overridden by their hunger. They poured past Ben, their silent shrieks visible in their gaping mouths, their attention fixed on the spot where the stones had hit. Ben tackled Maya, knocking her to the ground as the swarm of scuttlers surged past them. They were a river of pale, blind death, flowing through the silence. Katrin grabbed his arm, hauling him to his feet. This way, before they realized their mistake. They ran, leaving the dead zone behind them, the sound of the world rushing back in a dizzying flood. They were alive. But Ben knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the image of that silent, drifting void would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. He had seen the shape of nothingness, and it was hunting them. Chapter 9: The Ruptured Conduit. The escape from the silent zone left them shattered. The psychological whiplash of moving from absolute silence back into a world of sound was dizzying. Maya was shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide with the remembered horror of the hush. Ben felt a hollow buzzing in his ears, the ghost of the silence. Only Katrin seemed unaffected, her focus narrowed to a single, sharp point: the mission. "We are close," she announced, her voice a low anchor in their sea of terror. She pointed down the tunnel. The great iron conduit beside them began to branch, smaller pipes peeling off from the main artery. The feeder pipes for the upper levels. The primary junction is just ahead. They pressed on, the memory of the silent void and the chittering scuttlers pushing them forward. The air grew hotter, thick with the smell of sulfur and superheated rock. The conduit glowed with a faint, internal cherry-red heat. They were approaching the geothermal heart of the spire. The tunnel opened into a vast, circular chamber. In the center, a colossal valve mechanism, a tangled knot of iron and brass, controlled the flow of energy from the planet's core. This was the junction. Pipes, thick as ancient trees, snaked out from the central hub, disappearing into tunnels that led to every corner of the city. The entire room thrummed with immense, barely contained power. The air shimmered with the heat. "This is it," Ben said, his voice awed by the scale of the Victorian engineering. "The heart of St. Giles." "And the heart of Sallow's power," Katrin added, her eyes gleaming with a feverish light. She pointed to a massive pipe that rose vertically from the junction, straight up into the ceiling. "That is the main feed to the spire's upper levels, to his throne room." She unrolled the schematics, her finger tracing a specific point on the pipe. There, a pressure release valve, a relic of the first generation's safety protocols. Sallow would never think to guard it. He believes no one would be foolish enough to come down here. "So we just turn a wheel?" Maya asked, her voice skeptical. "The wheel is seized with a century of rust and pressure," Katrin said, producing a long, heavy iron bar from her pack, a lever. "It will require force, more than I can manage alone." That was their role. The muscle. Ben looked at the valve, 20 feet up the side of the glowing, vibrating pipe. A rusted service ladder was bolted to the conduit next to it. It would be like climbing the side of a furnace. "I'll do it," Ben said. He stripped off his pack and jacket, the intense heat of the room already making him sweat. He took the iron bar from Katrin. "I'll go with you," Maya said, her voice surprisingly firm. The terror of the last few hours had forged something new in her, a hard, defiant anger. "I can document it. If we don't make it out, at least someone will know what happened here." She adjusted her head-mounted camera, its red light a small, defiant spark in the immense, humming chamber. Ben didn't argue. He understood her need to impose a narrative on the chaos, to feel some semblance of control. He started up the ladder, the rungs hot even through his gloves. Maya followed close behind. Katrin stood guard below, her bone knife in one hand, her eyes scanning the multiple tunnel entrances to the chamber. The climb was hellish. The heat was a physical presence pressing in on them, making their lungs burn. The vibration from the pipe resonated through Ben's bones. He reached the valve platform, a small, grilled ledge just big enough for two people. The wheel was massive, easily 4 feet in diameter, its surface a solid crust of rust. "Okay," Ben grunted, wedging the iron bar into the spokes of the wheel. "On 3, push." He put his shoulder into it, the muscles in his back and legs screaming in protest. The wheel didn't budge. It was fused solid. "Again," he gasped, sweat stinging his eyes. They pushed again, a groan of tortured metal. The wheel moved a fraction of an inch with a screech that echoed through the chamber. From below, Katrin's urgent voice cut through the noise. "Company." Ben looked down. From one of the main tunnels, a patrol of copperjacks was marching into the chamber, 4 of them. They hadn't seen them yet, their attention focused on the central valve mechanism. But they would. "We're out of time," Maya said, her voice tight with panic. "We are not," Ben said through gritted teeth. A strange, cold calm settled over him. They had come too far, he would not fail now. "Again, all your weight." He ignored the approaching jacks. He ignored the searing heat. He focused every ounce of his strength, every bit of his fear and rage into the bar. They pushed. With a deafening crack, the rust seal broke. The wheel began to turn. It was stiff, fighting them for every inch, but it was moving. A high-pitched screaming sound began to emanate from the valve, the sound of immense pressure seeking an escape. The copperjacks heard it. Their helmeted heads snapped up. They saw them. They raised their weapons, not hushbats, but sophisticated-looking rifles that hummed with a strange energy. "They're almost here," Katrin yelled. Ben gave one final, desperate shove on the lever. The wheel spun freely. A jet of pale, superheated steam erupted from the valve, a controlled, focused blast that shot upwards into the pipe leading to the throne room. It was a silent, deadly column of pure heat. Their work was done. "Go," Ben yelled, scrambling back towards the ladder. A shot rang out from below. Not a gunshot, but a sharp, resonant thump. A projectile slammed into the pipe next to Ben's head, and the area was instantly coated in a thick, dark, resinous substance that hardened on contact. It was the same material that had sealed the door in the quarantine station. A containment weapon. Another shot hit the ladder below Maya, sealing several rungs together in the black gunk. Their escape was cut off. "They're trapping us," Maya cried, her light dancing frantically over the hardening resin. They were perched on a furnace, 20 feet in the air, with 4 heavily armed enforcers below them. Katrin charged forward, a wild battle cry on her lips, but she was hopelessly outmatched. A shot from one of the rifles caught her in the shoulder, not piercing her, but pinning her to the wall in a mass of the rapidly hardening resin. She was captured. Ben looked around, his mind racing. There was no escape. They were going to die here, or worse, be taken to a furious Lord Sallow. His eyes fell on the geothermal conduit, on the immense pressure they had just unleashed. An idea, a terrible, sacrificial idea, bloomed in his mind. "Maya," he said, his voice grim, "give me your camera." "What, why?" "Just give it to me, and get back, as far as you can." She saw the look in his eyes, and her face paled. Without a word, she handed him the head-mounted camera rig. He secured it to his own head. He turned back to the valve. He had opened it. Now he was going to break it. He raised the heavy iron bar. "Ben, no," Maya screamed. He brought the bar down with all his might on the valve's central housing. The metal dented. He struck it again, and again. A crack appeared. The high-pitched scream of the steam intensified. The copperjacks below realized what he was doing. They focused their fire on him, encasing his legs and torso in the black resin, pinning him to the platform. He was trapped, but he could still move his arms. He raised the bar one last time, a final act of defiance. He brought it down on the cracked housing. The valve ruptured. It was not an explosion of fire, but of force. A deafening roar filled the chamber as a column of raw geothermal energy, a blast of steam and pressure and incandescent gas erupted from the broken valve. It didn't go up, it went out. The wave of force hit the copperjacks, flinging them like dolls against the far wall. It hit Katrin, shattering the resin that held her and sending her skidding across the floor. It hit Maya, throwing her from the platform into the relative safety of a side tunnel. And it hit Ben. For a fraction of a second, the camera recorded it all. The world dissolving into a white-hot roar, the sensation of being simultaneously vaporized and torn apart. Then, the signal cut out. The last broadcast of Maya Chen was over. Chapter 10. The Maya witch's reign. Pain, that was the first thing Maya registered, a dull, throbbing pain that encompassed her entire body. She was lying on a bed of soft, damp moss. A fire crackled nearby. She opened her eyes. She was back in Katrin's hovel. The Meyer witch was there, her arm in a crude sling, her face a mask of grim concentration as she ground herbs in a stone bowl. She looked up as Maya stirred. "You are awake," she said. It was not a question. "Ben," Maya's voice was a dry croak. The memory of the blast of Ben's sacrifice crashed down on her. "He is gone," Katrin said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He gave his life to break Sallow's power, a surface man with the heart of a revolutionary." She pushed the bowl of herbs towards Maya. "Eat. It will help with the pain." Maya pushed it away. "What happened after the blast?" "Chaos," Katrin said, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "The spire is crippled. The upper levels are a superheated tomb. Sallow is dead. His copperjacks are scattered, their leadership decapitated. The bone masons and the tallowmen have no one to serve. The hushed children wander the streets lost. The city is ours." She had won, her mad plan had worked, but the cost was Ben. "I found this near the entrance to the junction," Katrin said, holding up a mangled piece of plastic and metal. It was Maya's camera, twisted and melted by the heat. The recording chip was fused, but it is a symbol now, the story of the surface dwellers who freed the deep. Maya felt a profound, hollow emptiness. Her obsession with documenting, with sharing the story, it all seemed so meaningless now. The story was over, and she was still here. In the days that followed, Maya watched as Katrin's prophecy came true. The city was in turmoil. Factions warred in the streets. The trench scuttlers, no longer held in check by the copper jacks, swarmed up from the depths. The chime liches, drawn by the sounds of battle, became a constant, melodic terror. The grand ossuary became a battleground. But Katrin, the Meyer witch, thrived in the chaos. She was a force of nature, gathering followers from the city's outcasts, using her knowledge of the deep and the fear associated with her name to carve out a new territory. She was no longer just a rebel. She was a queen, ruling a kingdom of mud and monsters. Maya was her honored guest, the last survivor from the overworld, a living monument to the revolution. But she was also a prisoner. The way to the surface was forgotten, the ghost station a lifetime away. She was trapped in the new world she had helped create. One evening, as she stared into the fire in Katrin's hovel, Maya noticed something she hadn't before. The moss that Katrin used for bedding, for poultices, for tea. It was the same phosphorescent fungus that grew throughout the city, and it was growing on Katrin. Tiny, shimmering, crystalline flecks were visible on her skin, in her hair, the same crystal as the chime liches. "The plague," Maya whispered, her blood running cold. "You're infected." Katrin looked at her hand, at the faint, beautiful shimmer on her knuckles. "We are all infected," she said, her voice calm. "It is the air we breathe, the water we drink. It is the deep itself. For most, it leads to the crystal sleep, but for a few, for those with the right temperament, it does something else." She smiled, and her smile was no longer just cunning. It was ancient and alien. "It grants understanding. It connects us to the mother. It is Sallow's sacrament, but he was too weak to truly embrace it. He tried to control it. I have let it become part of me. Maya finally understood. Katrin hadn't been immune. She was the plague's ultimate expression. She had used Ben, not just to overthrow a tyrant, but to claim the city for her true master, the infection itself. "What will you become?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "A new kind of queen," Katrin said, her eyes glowing with a faint internal luminescence. "And you, surface dweller, will be my scribe. You will document my reign, a new history for a new world." Maya looked at the broken camera in her lap. She thought of Ben's final, selfless act, broadcast to no one. She was the sole keeper of that memory, the last witness to the world that was. Katrin was offering her a role, a purpose in this new, horrifying world, to be the historian of the apocalypse. She had a choice: fade into obscurity, a relic of a dead world, or pick up the pen and write the first chapter of the Age of the Mire Witch. It was a monstrous choice, but survival in the deep had always been monstrous, and she, Maya Chen, was a survivor. Chapter 11: The First Scribe. Weeks turned into months. The chaos in St. Giles in the Deep did not subside. It evolved. Katrin's faction, the Mireborn, grew in power, their numbers swelled by outcasts and pragmatists who saw the tide turning. They warred with the remaining packs of trench scuttlers and held their own against the leaderless remnants of the old regime. The chime liches, an ever-present threat, became a feature of the landscape, their melodic patrols forcing a new kind of silence upon the city's inhabitants. Maya became Katrin's scribe. She was given tools: vellum crafted from processed fungus, ink made from the secretions of a cave-dwelling squid, and quills fashioned from the spines of glimmerwing moths. She lived in a small, dry chamber near Katrin's hovel, a privileged prisoner in the new court. Her job was to record the history of the new age. She documented Katrin's victories, the tamming of a dripmaw nest, the forging of an uneasy truce with the bone masons. She wrote the new laws of the mire, laws built not on morality, but on the brutal pragmatism of survival. But at night, in secret, she wrote another history. On scraps of hidden parchment, using a piece of charcoal, she wrote the story of Ben Carter. She wrote of the surface world, of the sun and the sky and the mundane beauty of a world without monsters. She wrote of their descent, of their foolish quest for fame that had led them to this hell. She wrote of his bravery, his sacrifice. It was a story for an audience that would never read it. It was an act of personal rebellion, a way to keep a part of herself from being consumed by the deep. The crystalline plague continued its slow, inexorable work on Katrin. The shimmering flecks on her skin grew more pronounced, forming elegant, branching patterns on her arms and face. Her movements became slower, more deliberate, her thoughts more alien. She spent long hours in silence, communing with what she called the mother, the great fungal consciousness that was the city's soul. One day, she summoned Maya to her throne room, a large cavern where a throne of gnarled roots and glowing moss had been built. "Scribe," Katrin said, her voice a soft, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in Maya's bones. "The time has come. The mother calls for a new expansion, a new harvest." "What do you mean?" Maya asked, a familiar dread coiling in her stomach. The deep is hungry, Katrin explained, her glowing eyes fixed on a point in the darkness above. It is time to open a new door, to invite new guests. She unrolled a map on the floor. It was not one of the schematics they had stolen. It was a modern map, a map of the London Underground. Katrin pointed a long, crystalline finger at a station on the Northern Line. Here, she said, Camden Town, a place of great traffic, great energy. The rock is thin there. A few months of work and my new masons can carve a path. A new ghost station to lure the curious, the brave, the foolish. Maya stared at her in horror. It was a cycle, a trap. St. Giles in the Deep was not a static prison. It was a predator. It was a carnivorous plant, and the ghost stations were its lures. Aldwych had been a success, yielding Ben and herself and ultimately a new order for the deep. Now Katrin, as the plague's high priestess, was setting a new trap. "You are going to do it all over again," Maya whispered. "It is the way of things," Katrin hummed. "The deep provides, the deep protects, the deep consumes, the deep grows." She looked at Maya, a strange, possessive affection in her glowing eyes. "And you, my first scribe, will document it all. You will write the gospels of our new age. You will tell the story of our ascension." Maya looked at the quill in her hand. She thought of her secret history, the story of Ben. She thought of the sun. She had a choice. She could accept her role as the chronicler of this eternal, growing nightmare, or she could make one last, desperate stand. She knew the maintenance tunnels now. She knew the secret paths. She knew the city's weaknesses. Katrin had taught her everything. The idea was insane, a suicidal fantasy. But as she looked at the monstrous, radiant queen on her fungal throne, she knew she had to try. She could not be the poet laureate of hell. Her story was not over. Ben's sacrifice would not be a footnote in the gospel of a monster. It would be the prologue to the next chapter, the chapter where the scribe fought back. The city was a predator, but even predators could be hunted. And she was the only one left who remembered how to be human. Chapter 12, The Book of the Damned. The decision settled in Maya's soul not with a crash of thunder, but with a quiet, cold finality. She would not be Katrin's pet. She would not chronicle the spread of this living damnation. She would become a saboteur, a ghost, a whispered legend of defiance. Ben's story would not end with his death. It would end with her vengeance. She played her part, bowing her head in feigned submission. "As you command, my queen. The new age must be recorded for all who follow." Katrin, lost in her symbiotic communion with the plague, accepted the lie. Maya returned to her chambers and began her preparations. She was no longer a reckless techie. She was a creature of the deep, remade by grief and horror. She gathered what she could: a pouch of the blinding, glimmerwing dust, a sharpened shard of obsidian she had hidden, a length of tough, fibrous root vine. Her greatest weapon, however, was knowledge. She had the maps in her head, Katrin's secret ways, the dead zones of the hush, the hunting grounds of the drip maws. She also had her secret history. She took the scattered parchments of Ben's story, and with meticulous care, she began to stitch them into the spine of an empty, leather-bound volume she had been given for her official duties. The Book of the Damned, she called it. It was a Bible of the world that was, a testament to a single, pointless, heroic death. It was a history of the sun. Her plan was desperate, a long shot born of rage. She could not kill Katrin, who was becoming less a person and more a physical manifestation of the plague. She could not fight the entire city, but she could sever the connection. She could silence the mother. The mother, the great fungal superorganism, pulsed in its cavern beneath the city. Katrin had told her it was nourished by the great chasm, the city's refuse pit. For generations, the inhabitants had thrown their dead, their waste, their failures into the chasm, believing it a simple disposal. Maya now knew it was a feeding. They were nourishing their god. Her target was not the mother itself, but the geothermal vent deep within its chamber, the one that gave it warmth and life. A secondary vent, far smaller than the one Ben had destroyed, but vital. If she could block it, choke it with cold, she might not kill the mother, but she could send it into hibernation. She could cut Katrin off from her power source. The night of the new moon, a meaningless concept in the eternal dark, but a date marked on Katrin's new calendar, was when the work on the Camden Tunnel was set to begin. The city would be distracted. It was her only chance. With the Book of the Damned strapped to her back, Maya slipped into the shadows. She moved through the city like a wraith, her steps silent, her path weaving through the territories of monsters she now understood. She used a dead sump serpent to mask her scent from the glimmerwings. She used a series of carefully thrown stones to navigate a chime-lick patrol, sending them on a melodic wild goose chase. She descended into the deepest parts of the city, into the refuse trenches where even the trench scuttlers feared to tread. Here, the air was thick with the final exhalations of the mother. She found the entrance to the birthing chamber, a sphincter-like opening in a wall of pulsating fungal matter. She slipped inside. The chamber was a cathedral of horrors. The mother was a mountain of pale, pulsing flesh, veined with threads of glowing mycelium. The air was warm, wet, and hummed with a low, psychic thrum, the thoughts of the creature itself. Maya could feel its immense, alien consciousness pressing against her own, a tidal wave of hunger, growth, and endless, patient desire. In the center of the chamber, steam rose from a fissure in the rock, the life-giving vent. Maya knew that destroying it with force was impossible, but she had seen how the lamplighter, the creature of absolute cold, had been used by Sallow. She had heard Katrin speak of how it was drawn to heat. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. She pulled out her secret weapon. Tucked away in her pack was the one piece of technology she had salvaged and repaired, the signal generator. She had jury-rigged it to a small, powerful battery from a copperjack's rifle. It would not last long, but it would be powerful. She set it to emit not a sound, but a high-frequency, concentrated beam of heat. She aimed the device at the geothermal vent. A section of the rock began to glow, a tiny, artificial sun in the heart of the fungal god. Then she fled, scrambling out of the chamber and ran. She didn't have to wait long. From the upper levels of the city, a new sense of cold began to descend. The faint glow of the moss on the walls dimmed. The air grew sharp, frosty. The lamplighter had taken the bait. It was drawn to this new, intense source of heat, this intrusion into its cold, dark world. Maya watched from a hidden ledge as the skeletal, shadowy form of the lamplighter descended through the city. It moved with an unnatural speed, a wave of absolute cold preceding it. The denizens of the deep fled before it, a panicked exodus from the spreading frost. The lamplighter reached the mother's chamber and entered without hesitation. A moment later, the psychic hum that saturated the air stuttered and died. A deep, profound cold emanated from the chamber, followed by a sound Maya had never heard before, the sound of the mother's pain. It was a low, tearing, groaning sound, like a glacier breaking apart. The walls of the chamber cracked, and the pulsating light of the mycelium faded to a dull, dying gray. On her throne, Katrin must have felt it, a psychic scream that was for her alone, the severing. Maya didn't wait to see the outcome. She began the long, perilous journey upwards, towards the ghost station, towards home. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, a saboteur, a ghost carrying a book of memories. She didn't know if she would make it. She didn't know what world she would find if she did. But as she climbed, leaving the dying city and its wounded god behind, she felt something she hadn't felt since she saw the flicker of the first gaslight. A sliver of hope, fragile and fierce, a tiny flame in a world of overwhelming darkness. Her story was not over. A new chapter, the chapter of the ascent, had just begun. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Ossuary. Hope was a dangerous fuel. It burned bright and hot, but it could gutter at the slightest breeze, leaving a darkness colder than before. Maya shielded her fragile flame of hope as she began her climb, turning her back on the groaning, convulsing chamber of the wounded mother. The psychic scream had faded, replaced by a deep, subterranean tremor that vibrated through the rock, a constant reminder of the chaos she had unleashed. The city was in shock. The faint, ambient glow from the city-wide mycelial network was dimming, plunging the familiar streets and alleys into a deeper, more treacherous gloom. The air was colder, the dampness clinging to her clothes with a new, biting chill. The entire ecosystem of St. Giles in the Deep was failing. It was a victory, but Maya felt no triumph. She was a saboteur in a dying world, and she was still a part of it. Her path upwards was a reversal of her descent, but the landmarks were twisted, nightmarish versions of what she remembered. The Tallowman's quarter was dark, the rendering vats cold, the gaslights extinguished. Hezekiah Crowell was gone, likely fled or consumed. In his place, a different kind of darkness was taking root. The silence here was heavy, unnatural, a dead zone spreading from the wounded mother. Maya clicked on the signal generator, its low hiss a welcome shield, and hurried through the oppressive quiet. She moved with a hunter's grace she did not know she possessed, a muscle memory of survival burned into her by Katrin's tutelage. She skirted the territories of the city's more primitive horrors, her senses honed to the subtle cues of danger, the telltale drip of a dripmaw's venom, the scent of ozone that heralded a lamplighter's passage. The city's chaos was her camouflage. Warring factions of scuttlers and the remnants of Sallow's guard clashed in the gaslit streets, their battles a welcome distraction that drew attention away from the lone figure slipping through the shadows. Her greatest obstacle, she knew, would be the grand ossuary. It was the main artery to the upper levels, and its master, the bone mason, was a territorial beast. As she approached, The sounds of conflict faded, replaced by an unnerving quiet. The entrance to the great bone cathedral was barricaded. A crude wall of skulls and femurs, mortared together with a haste that belied Grendel's usual craftsmanship, blocked the main archway. He had sealed himself inside. Maya found a smaller, secondary entrance, a service tunnel she and Ben had fled through. She peered inside. The ossuary was transformed. Master Grendel was no longer just a mason. He had become a king in a court of skeletons. He sat upon a newly constructed throne of spines and pelvic bones, the femur-headed mallet resting across his lap like a scepter. He had gathered his creations around him, the grotesque child dolls, half-finished bone golems, like a deranged royal family. He was a hermit crab who had found the perfect, macabre shell in the midst of the city's collapse. He would not tolerate trespassers. The chamber was a wide, open space. To cross it would be suicide. Grendel's hearing was legendary, his rage absolute. Maya retreated into the service tunnel, her mind racing. She could not go around. She could not go through. She had to displace the obstacle. She had to introduce a greater chaos. She thought of the chime liches, predictable, relentless, programmed. Her new plan was cold and calculated, a piece of logic worthy of Katrin. She backtracked, heading for a section of the city where she knew the liches patrolled. Finding one was not difficult. Its melodic, sickening tinkling echoed through a deserted market square. It shambled aimlessly, drawn by the distant sounds of a skirmish. Maya began her own performance. She took out the shard of obsidian and a piece of scrap metal from her pack. She stayed upwind, out of sight, and began to tap them together. Tink, 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 chime. She mimicked the rhythm of the creature's own music. It was a crude imitation, but it was enough. The chime lick stopped. Its crystalline head tilted, processing the new sound. It was a challenge, a rival, an intrusion into its sonic territory. It began to move towards her, its own chiming becoming more agitated, more aggressive. She led it on a deadly chase. She stayed just ahead, her bootfalls masked by the creature's own noise, renewing her decoy rhythm whenever its attention seemed to wander. She led it away from the market, through the winding alleys, towards the silent, waiting fortress of the bone mason. She reached the barricaded main entrance to the ossuary. The chime lick was close behind, a frantic, discordant jangle of impending violence. Maya took a deep breath, took aim, and threw her piece of scrap metal over the bone wall. It landed deep inside the chamber with a loud, echoing clatter. The effect was immediate. The chime lick, its simple programming utterly focused on the new, loud sound, did not hesitate. It lowered its head and charged. It smashed through the barricade with the force of a battering ram, a shower of skulls and splintered bone exploding into the chamber. A roar of incandescent fury erupted from within the ossuary. Master Grendel, his solitude shattered, rose from his throne. He saw the glittering, crystalline intruder, the source of the noise that had violated his sanctuary. He hefted his femur mallet, and with a bellow that shook the very foundations of the bone cathedral, he charged to meet the lick. Monster versus monster. A battle of silent, territorial rage against mindless, melodic destruction. Maya didn't stay to watch. She slipped back to the service entrance, and under the cover of the titanic, crashing battle, she ran. She kept her head down, sprinting across the floor of the ossuary past the dueling abominations. The chimelic, a whirlwind of shattering crystal, was holding its own against the brute force of the bone mason. It was a battle that would likely destroy them both, and a good portion of the chamber with them. She reached the far side, the tunnels that led towards the quarantine station, and didn't look back. She had sacrificed a pawn to take a castle, and the coldness of her own strategy settled deep in her gut. The deep was not just teaching her to survive. It was teaching her to think like it. The upper tunnels were colder, quieter. The tremors from the wounded mother were less pronounced here. A strange sense of finality began to settle over Maya. She was getting close. The air started to smell of stale dust and antiseptic, the familiar sense of the upper quarantine zone. She rounded a corner and stopped dead. Her breath hitched. There, on the grimy floor of the tunnel, was a single, dull shard of crystal. It was not the glittering, resonant crystal of a chime lick. It was the dark, muted, organic crystal she had seen growing on Katrin. Maya's blood ran cold. She backed away slowly, her eyes scanning the shadows. A voice, no longer a resonant hum but a dry, venomous hiss, echoed down the tunnel. "Scribe." Maya spun around. Leaning against the far wall, wreathed in shadows, was Katrin. She was a ruin. The severance from the mother had ravaged her. The crystalline growths on her skin were no longer beautiful. They were jagged, cancerous spurs that pierced her rags. Her face was gaunt, her eyes no longer glowing but burning with a black, hateful fire. She was weaker, but she was vibrating with a desperate, focused rage. "You took my city," Katrin hissed, pushing herself off the wall. She moved with a stiff, pained gait, but there was a predator's coiled energy in her posture. "You took my god. I will not let you take my scribe." Ahead of Maya, the tunnel leading to the final staircase was blocked. A thick, thorny lattice of the dark crystal, grown from the wall, sealed the passage completely. Katrin had trapped her. She had driven her into this dead-end tunnel for a final reckoning. "It's over, Katrin," Maya said, her voice shaking but firm. She held up the obsidian shard, a pathetic weapon against the woman who had taught her everything. Katrin laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Over. My dear, foolish scribe, you carry my history, you carry my plague." She pointed a sharp, crystalline finger at Maya's chest. "The story does not end until the author says it does, and ours will end here in the dark together." As she lunged. Chapter 14. The Price of the Sun. Katrin moved with a terrifying, broken speed. The grace she once possessed was gone, replaced by a feral, twitching urgency. She was a thing of pure vengeance, her crystalline spurs scything through the air. Maya stumbled back, the obsidian shard feeling like a child's toy in her hand. This was not a fight she could win with force. She dodged to the side as Katrin's claws scraped against the rock wall where her head had been moments before. The hissing sound of Katrin's breath filled the narrow tunnel. Maya knew this ground. She knew its history. It was part of the old quarantine station, a place of forgotten technology and desperate measures. "You taught me to survive here," Maya panted, backing away down a side corridor she knew was a dead end. She was luring her prey. You taught me to see the weaknesses. I taught a viper to bite, Katrin snarled, stalking her into the narrow passage. A lesson I will now correct. The passage ended in a small utility room. Old electrical conduits, thick as a man's arm, lined the walls, their insulation long since rotted away to reveal the dull copper beneath. A rusted control panel stood in the corner, its levers and switches frozen in place. It was a tomb of dead technology. Katrin blocked the only exit, a cruel, triumphant smile on her ruined face. No more running, scribe. It is time to close the book. Maya's eyes darted around the room. Her gaze fell on the thick conduits, then on a detail she had noticed on her first, panicked flight through these tunnels. A heavy, rubber-sheathed emergency axe in a wall-mounted case for fighting electrical fires. The rubber on the handle was cracked and brittle, but it was there. She kicked the glass case, shattering it. She grabbed the axe, its weight solid and unfamiliar in her hands. Katrin laughed. A primitive tool, you think to chop me like wood. No, Maya said, her eyes fixed on the conduits behind the Meyer witch. I think to wake the dead. With a desperate cry, she swung the axe not at Katrin, but at the main power conduit on the wall. The heavy steel head bit deep, shearing through the corroded copper. A shower of brilliant, electric blue sparks erupted, illuminating the small room in a strobing, unholy light. The air crackled, the smell of ozone sharp and violent. A deep, groaning hum started up, the sound of ancient generators somewhere in the station trying to answer a sudden, catastrophic demand for power. Lights flickered weakly in their sockets for the first time in 60 years. Katrin shrieked, shielding her eyes from the sudden, alien glare. She was a creature of the dark and the damp, of organic, geothermal energy. This raw, chaotic electricity was anathema to her. Maya swung again, striking another conduit. More sparks flew, one landing on a pool of stagnant, oily water on the floor. It ignited with a soft whoosh, a line of pale fire spreading across the room, separating Maya from her tormentor. The fire, the light, the raw power, it was a symphony of the surface world, a violent intrusion into the deep's quiet decay. Katrin recoiled, her crystalline growth seeming to shrink from the heat. The plague that gave her power was vulnerable to the very forces that had built the world above. You are destroying this place, Katrin hissed, her rage mixed with a primal fear. This place is already destroyed, Maya yelled back, her voice raw with grief and fury. You just decorated the tomb. She used the wall of fire as a shield, scrambling towards the control panel. She put her shoulder to the largest lever, a massive circuit breaker marked with a faded lightning bolt symbol. It was frozen solid. She hooked the head of the axe behind it and pulled, using it as a lever. Metal screamed in protest. The lever moved an inch at a time. The humming from the generators grew louder, more strained. The lights in the room pulsed, growing brighter, then dimmer. Katrin, recovering from her shock, lunged through a gap in the flames. Her crystal-tipped fingers closed around Maya's throat. Her grip was like iron. Black spots danced in Maya's vision. I will not be erased, Katrin choked out, her face inches from Maya's, her eyes burning with a black fire. With the last of her strength, Maya gave a final, desperate heave on the axe. The main breaker slammed home with a deafening clang. Every light in the station flared to a blinding, impossible white. The generators somewhere below gave a final, mortal groan and then exploded. The surge of power was absolute. The conduits on the walls glowed cherry red, then white, then melted. The electricity arced through the air, turning the room into a cage of lightning. It arced through Katrin. She convulsed, a horrific, silent scream tearing at her lips. The crystal on her body acted as a conductor, channeling the raw power through every fiber of her being. She lit up from the inside, a grotesque, crystalline lantern. For a brief, terrible moment, Maya could see her skeleton through her flesh. Then, with a sound like shattering glass and frying meat, she collapsed, a smoking, blackened ruin on the floor. The lights went out. The fire died. The room was plunged back into darkness and silence, the only light coming from the glowing, molten conduits. Maya lay on the floor, gasping for air, the smell of ozone and burnt flesh searing her nostrils. She was alive. It was over. She stumbled from the room, leaving the body of her teacher and tormentor behind. The crystal barrier blocking the tunnel was gone, shattered by the power surge. The path was clear. She found the spiral staircase, its iron rungs cold and familiar. The climb was an ascent from hell into purgatory. The air grew thinner, cleaner. She could smell the rain. At the top of the stairs, a square of faint, gray light promised a world she no longer felt she belonged to. She put her shoulder to the maintenance grate. It swung open onto a wet, cobbled alley. London. Rain fell in a steady, cleansing drizzle. The noise was overwhelming, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic, the chatter of voices. It was the music of life. Maya scrambled out, pulling herself onto the solid ground of the surface. She stood in the rain, letting it wash the grime and the blood and the memory from her skin. She was free. She had survived. She looked down at her hands, her knuckles raw and scraped. She saw it then. On the back of her hand, almost invisible in the gray light, a single, tiny, shimmering fleck had appeared on her skin. It glittered, delicate and beautiful, like a captured star. The plague had not been in the air. It was in the food Katrin had fed her, the water she had drunk, the poultices that had healed her wounds. She had been infected from the very beginning. The horror of St. Giles in the Deep was not contained. It was not dead. She was its ark. She had carried the seed of the deep back to the surface. She looked up at the sprawling, indifferent city, at the millions of unsuspecting souls moving through the rain. The story was not over. The descent had ended. The invasion was about to begin. Chapter 15. A Quarantine of One. The world Maya had returned to was an assault. After months in the muted, gaslit gloom of the deep, the surface was a cacophony of shrieking color and sound. The gray London sky seemed impossibly bright. The roar of a double-decker bus made her flinch. The chatter of a passing crowd felt like a physical blow. She was a deep-sea creature dragged into the sun, every nerve raw and exposed. She found her way to the small flat she had rented before the expedition, moving like a phantom through a city that no longer felt like hers. Her key still worked. The flat was just as she had left it, clothes slung over a chair, a half-empty mug of coffee on the counter, a stack of unpaid bills on the table. It was a museum of a person who no longer existed. That Maya, the one who worried about subscribers and Wi-Fi signals, was as dead as Ben. In the sterile silence of the bathroom, under the harsh glare of an electric light, she examined the fleck on her hand. It was no bigger than a grain of salt, but it held the weight of an entire subterranean world. It was a perfect, six-sided crystal, embedded in her skin. She tried to scrape it off with a fingernail, then with the tip of a pair of tweezers. It was useless. It was as much a part of her as the bone beneath. Sleep was impossible. When she closed her eyes, she saw not the darkness of her room, but the oppressive, absolute black of the deep. She saw Grendel's throne of bones and the empty, wheezing helmets of the copper jacks. She could feel the psychic hum of the mother, a phantom limb that still ached. Days bled into a paranoid haze. She kept the curtains drawn, unable to bear the light of the sun. She watched the news on a tablet, seeing the oblivious world move on. The people on the screen seemed fragile, like glass animals, unaware of the vast, predatory darkness that slumbered beneath their feet. She felt an immense, terrifying gulf between herself and them. She was a wolf in a sheep pen, a carrier of a plague that had toppled a civilization. The thought of telling someone, the police, the health authorities, was a bitter joke. What would she say? That a subterranean Victorian city had infected her with a crystalline fungus after she'd battled bone masons and a creature made of living shadow. They would lock her in a padded room, or worse, a lab. They would study her, dissect her, try to understand the plague. They would become the new Lord Sallow, and she would be their prized specimen. She would not allow that to happen. She was her own quarantine, a nation of one under a strict and final lockdown. One rainy afternoon, she pulled the Book of the Damned from her pack. The leather cover was stiff, the pages smelling faintly of moss and charcoal. She sat on the floor of her darkened flat and read the story she had written in the deep, the story of Ben Carter. She read about his cautious optimism at the start, his steady pragmatism in the face of their first horrors, his quiet bravery in the ossuary. She read about his final, selfless act at the geothermal junction, a sacrifice made not for glory, but simply because it was the only thing left to do. His death had a purpose: to stop the deep, to protect the surface he had come from. A profound, terrible clarity washed over Maya. Ben had died to keep the horror contained. Her survival, her escape, had rendered his sacrifice meaningless. She had become the very thing he had died to prevent from reaching the surface. Her purpose, then, was clear. It was not to survive. It was to finish the job. She had to ensure the quarantine Ben had died for was not broken. The line had to be held, and she was the last soldier left to hold it. Her paranoia sharpened into a cold, grim resolve. She wiped her tablet, her phone, any digital trace of her existence. She packed a small bag with the essentials: bottled water, a few tins of food, a powerful torch, and the Book of the Damned. She left the flat without a backward glance. She walked through the city, a ghost with a final destination. She needed a place to die, a place where she would not be found, a place where the plague she carried would be contained forever. A tomb. She found it in the docklands, an area of urban decay and forgotten industry. A vast, derelict concrete silo, part of a grain terminal that had been abandoned for decades. It was a fortress of concrete and steel, isolated and ignored. A perfect, self-contained mausoleum. She found a way in through a rusted maintenance hatch at the base. The inside was a cathedral of industrial decay, silent save for the drip of water and the coo of pigeons high above. The air was cold and still. It felt right. It felt like the quiet of the deep, but without the malice. She climbed the iron staircase that wound around the silo's inner wall, ascending into the gloom. She needed to be high up, away from any chance of accidental discovery. Near the top, she found a small, windowless control room, its machinery long since stripped for scrap. This would be the place. She sat on the cold, concrete floor, the Book of the Damned in her lap. She opened it to the first page, the page about a cocky urban explorer named Ben who thought stories were just stories. She took a deep breath of the dusty air, the last clean breath she would ever take, and she waited for the deep to claim the last piece of its property. Chapter 16. The Silent Guardian. Time in the silo ceased to be linear. It was measured in the slow creep of the crystal. The single fleck on her hand was the epicenter of a silent, beautiful, horrifying bloom. The growth was not like the cancerous spurs that had claimed Katrin. On the surface, in the thin, cold air, the plague expressed itself differently. It grew in delicate, branching fractals like frost on a window pane. It traced the lines of her veins, spreading up her arm in a filigree of shimmering, translucent crystal. It was painless, but she could feel it. A low, internal vibration, a hum that resonated with a frequency just beyond hearing. It was the song of her own body being rewritten, cell by cell. With the physical transformation came a psychological one. The temptation Katrin had warned of. Whispers bloomed in the quiet of her mind, not in words but in pure geometric concepts. The plague was not just a mindless infection. It was an intelligence, a library of consciousness. It offered her understanding. It showed her the intricate, silent dance of cosmic dust, the slow, patient life of the rock, the grand, emotionless perspective of a being that measured its life in millennia. It offered her peace, a release from the messy, painful cage of her humanity. She fought it. She clung to the memories that the plague tried to wash away, the taste of coffee, the feel of rain on her face, Ben's stupid, hopeful grin before they opened the grate. She read his story from the Book of the Damned over and over, her own charcoal-smudged words a shield against the silent, seductive gospel of the crystal. She was Maya Chen. She was human. She would die human. The crystal spread. It crept up her neck, across her cheek, a lattice of impossible beauty. When she breathed, a soft, melodic chime, like the tinkling of a single shard of glass, echoed in the silent room. Her heartbeat was becoming a metronome for a chime lick. Soon the programming would take over. Soon the noise of the outside world would become an irresistible lure, and she would be compelled to hunt, a mindless monster driven by the plague's base instincts. She was running out of time. Her final preparations were simple. She chose a corner of the control room, a place where she would not be silhouetted against the door. She sat, arranging her body in a cross-legged position of calm meditation. It was the last piece of control she had left. She placed the Book of the Damned open in her lap. She took the heavy-duty sealant she had found in a maintenance locker, a thick, industrial epoxy. Following the instructions on the tube with a detached, clinical focus, she mixed the two compounds. The gray paste began to warm in its container. She worked quickly, methodically, plastering the thick adhesive over her mouth, sealing it shut. It was a crude and brutal act, but it was necessary. A chime-lick hunted with sound, but it also called to its brethren with a cry. She would be a silent one. Then she took the rest of the epoxy and sealed her hands to the book, and the book to her lap. She would be forever bound to her humanity, to Ben's story. She closed her eyes. She did not fight the transformation any longer. She let it come. The whispers became a chorus. The hum became a symphony. The crystal, no longer needing to creep, surged through her body. It bloomed from her skin, encasing her limbs, her torso, her face. It was a cold, purifying fire. Her last human thought was not of fear, but of the sun. The brilliant, beautiful, life-giving sun. And then Maya Chen was gone. In a forgotten concrete silo in the heart of London, a new statue took its place. It was a figure of breathtaking, terrible beauty, crafted from a crystal that shimmered with a faint, internal light. It was the form of a woman, seated in a pose of eternal meditation. In her lap rested a book, its pages fused into a single, crystalline block. The statue was silent. The melodic chime of its heart was encased, layer by layer, in a prison of its own making, until the sound was utterly, completely absorbed. It was a monument to a secret war, a silent guardian on the threshold of a great and terrible darkness. It sat in the quiet dust, a perfect, final quarantine, holding the last story of the sun against the encroaching silence of the deep. Chapter 17. The Unveiling. 50 years later. The London skyline was a forest of glass and steel, a landscape Maya Chen would not have recognized. The gritty, post-industrial decay of the docklands had long been scoured away by waves of gentrification, replaced by gleaming apartment towers and pristine riverside promenades. Only one defiant relic of the old age remained: a single, monolithic concrete silo, stained with half a century of rain and neglect. It stood like a rotten tooth in a perfect smile, a stubborn monument to a forgotten time, its demolition long overdue. George Massey shielded his eyes and looked up at the colossal structure. 40 years in demolition, and he'd never seen one they'd let stand this long. Legal battles, preservation orders from artists who thought it was a masterpiece of brutalism, nests of protected birds, always something. But now all the paperwork was signed. The charges were set. It was time for the old beast to come down. "Final sweep, Sam," George called out, his voice echoing slightly in the pre-dawn quiet. "Check the upper levels. Make sure no squatters got in overnight." Sam, a kid barely out of his apprenticeship, gave a thumbs up. "Right, Gov." He was eager, a little too romantic about the job for George's taste. He saw history in these old buildings. George just saw reinforced concrete and billable hours. They entered the silo through the cutting crew's access door. The inside was as still and silent as a tomb. A fine dust of aged concrete and pigeon droppings coated every surface. They split up. their heavy work boots crunching on the debris-strewn floor. George checked the lower levels, his powerful torch beam cutting through the gloom, while Sam took the long, spiraling staircase upwards. It was near the top that Sam found it. The door to the old control room was stiff, but he put his shoulder into it and it grated open. He shone his torch inside. "Gov," his voice crackled over the radio, a note of strange awe in it. "You need to see this." George sighed. "Find another dead fox, have you, son?" "No, I don't know what it is, just get up here." Curiosity overriding his annoyance, George began the long climb. He found Sam standing in the doorway of the control room, his torch beam fixed on the center of the room, his mouth slightly agape. George pushed past him and saw it. His breath caught in his throat. It was a statue. Seated on the floor in a pose of perfect meditative calm was the figure of a woman, crafted from a crystal he had never seen before. It was milky white and translucent, capturing and amplifying the weak light from their torches, seeming to glow with a soft, internal luminescence. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a masterpiece of artistry that had no place in this dusty, forgotten ruin. Fused to the statue's lap was a book, its cover and pages transformed into the same crystalline substance. Its hands were sealed to the book, its form a single, seamless piece. "What the hell is that?" George whispered, all thoughts of the demolition erased from his mind. He took a step closer. The figure's face was serene, its eyes closed, but it was the mouth that sent a shiver down his spine. It was covered by a rough, smeared patch of what looked like old, hardened cement, a deliberate, brutal act of vandalism on an otherwise perfect form. "It's got to be worth a fortune," Sam breathed, his eyes wide. "Some artist must have snuck in here years ago, Banksy or something. We can't bring the building down on top of this." George wasn't so sure. This felt different. It didn't feel like art. It felt like a warning. The silence in the room was too deep, the stillness of the statue too absolute. He reached out a gloved hand to touch its surface. It was cold as ice, and it seemed to thrum with a faint, almost subliminal vibration. He snatched his hand back. "We call it in," George said, his voice firm. "This is above our pay grade. Site foreman, then the police." "And let them take it," Sam argued. "Gov, this is a winning lottery ticket sitting right here. We could get it out, just a section of the floor, a clean cut." "Don't be a bloody idiot, Sam," George growled. "This thing is part of the floor. Look." He shone his torch at the base. The crystal flowed down, fusing the figure seamlessly to the concrete. "We're not touching it." But Sam's youthful greed was a powerful engine. While George had his back turned, trying to get a signal on his radio, Sam acted. He fetched a portable, gas-powered cutting torch from their kit downstairs. The roar of the torch firing up was a sacrilege in the silent silo. "Sam, shut that thing off now," George yelled, spinning around. "Just a small cut, Gov," Sam said, his face illuminated by the brilliant blue flame. "Just to see if it'll come loose." He knelt and applied the flame to the base of the statue, where the crystal met the concrete. The effect was instantaneous, and it was not what either of them expected. The crystal did not melt or crack. Where the intense heat touched it, it began to glow, not with a soft inner light, but with a fierce, brilliant white energy. The faint vibration George had felt intensified into a powerful, resonant hum that shook the entire room. Fine cracks, glowing with the same white light, began to spread from the base, racing up the statue's legs, its torso, its arms. "What's happening?" Sam stammered, scrambling back, dropping the torch. The rough seal over the statue's mouth cracked, falling away in a cloud of gray dust. The statue's lips, perfectly preserved beneath, parted slightly. A single, pure, melodic note, the first sound the statue had ever made, filled the air. It was a sound of impossible beauty and profound, soul-crushing horror. It was the sound of a lock, patiently waited for, finally turning. The statue's eyes, closed for 50 years, snapped open. They were not human eyes. They were orbs of pure, white light, and they fixed on the two terrified men. The chrysalis was breaking. Chapter 18. The New Acquisition. The statue did not move. It remained seated, a broken vessel of crystal and light. But the thing inside it was unfurling. The cracks widened, the light pouring out, not in a blinding flash, but in a slow, deliberate unveiling. The crystal shell, Maya's final prison and chrysalis, fell away in large, tinkling shards that dissolved into dust before they hit the floor. What was revealed was not Maya Chen. It was a perfect, terrifying heir. It had her form, her face, but it was an idealized, inhuman version. Its skin shimmered with the pearlescent luster of polished nacre. Its limbs were a fraction too long, its movements possessing a fluid, boneless grace that no human could replicate. Where the Book of the Damned had been, the pattern of its fused pages was now etched into its very skin, a permanent, organic scripture. This was no reanimated corpse. This was a second Genesis, a new form of life incubated in a womb of sacrifice and despair. It rose to its feet, its movements silent and deliberate. It looked at its own hands, flexing its long, slender fingers. It tilted its head, as if listening to a symphony only it could hear. The orbs of light that were its eyes swiveled, fixing on George and Sam, who were frozen in a state of primal terror beyond screaming. This was not a mindless chime lick. The rage, the hunger, the simple programming, all of it had been burned away, filtered through Maya's fierce, disciplined will during her long vigil. Her humanity had not been destroyed by the plague. It had been co-opted, used as a blueprint to create a perfect, intelligent emissary. An angel of the deep. The being took a step forward. It opened its mouth, and when it spoke, the voice was a chillingly beautiful amalgam. The clear, crisp tones of Maya Chen layered over a soft, melodic, crystalline resonance. "The quarantine is over," it said, its voice filling the room, calm and absolute. It looked down at the patterns on its skin, the ghost of the book. It seemed to absorb the entirety of Ben's story in a single, silent moment. A sacrifice was made. A seed was planted. A harvest is due. It raised a hand towards them. The gesture was not threatening. It was an offering, an invitation. "The library has been dormant for too long," it continued, its luminous eyes seeming to look straight through them, reading their fear, their histories, their simple, fragile lives. "We require new volumes, new stories." From its fingertips, a fine, glittering dust drifted into the air, swirling in the torchlight like diamond pollen. It was not an aggressive attack. It was a gentle, inexorable dissemination. George and Sam, paralyzed by awe and terror, could only watch as the motes landed on their skin, their clothes, their tongues. A cold tingling began to spread through George's hand, a familiar sensation he felt only in his deepest, most primal nightmares. He looked down. On the back of his glove, a single, tiny, six-sided crystal had bloomed, a perfect, exquisite harbinger of the end. Sam let out a choked, whimpering sob. The being smiled. It was Maya's smile, but it held no warmth, no humanity. It was the serene, detached smile of a god looking upon a new and fertile garden. "Do not be afraid," it chimed, its voice a soothing, terrible lullaby. "Your stories will be preserved. You will become part of a grander narrative. You will be made eternal." It turned its gaze away from them, towards the doorway, towards the city that lay sleeping and unaware beyond the silo's walls. The deep provides, the deep protects, the deep consumes, the beautiful, monstrous thing whispered, its voice mingling with the first rays of the morning sun filtering through the silo's high vents. The deep expands. The end.